Hello there. Have I got a story for you? My name is Stephen Tucker, and I've prepared via research and PowerPoint an homage of fidelity and honor to a special group of men who served during the Vietnam War. They fought and died in the First Battle of Khe Sanh, also known as the Hill Fights, from April 24th till 11 May 1967, as well as during the Siege of Khe Sanh, from January 21st to April 17th, 1968. Two Marine companies, India and Mike, of the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, manned one of the surrounding hills of the Khe Sanh combat base. The hill was 881 meters, or almost 3,000 feet tall. Marines on Hill 881 South began defending their outpost with approximately 400 men, including attachments. Once the shooting started, few finished their allotted time on Hill 881 South. The 326 is especially significant to me and sharpened my interest, even more while researching this infantry battalion. My father, Private Elvis A. Tucker, served in the 326th of the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima during World War II. The 326 took part in raising the flag in this timeless photo. As for the Super Gaggle mission, it involved the helicopter squadron I was a member of, Medium Marine Helicopter Squadron, or the acronym HMM 364. It was one of the most dangerous, precarious, and stressful missions we ever attempted during our tours in Vietnam. As you'll see in this story, the men of HMM 364 became tightly interwoven with the men of India and Mike companies for all time. Few people have heard the story about this symbiotic brotherhood between men at war. Both entities will continue to be always faithful to each other as long as there is a United States Marine Corps. With great pleasure, I present this story of courage, sacrifice, and esprit de corps about the Marines of Hill 881 South. This presentation is rather lengthy, approximately 290 images in 6 parts, with, of course, the voiceover, footnotes, and my various ramblings. It's about 3.5 hours long. So please take my advice and read it in chunks. Just stick with it. Although the quality varies some, most of the slides are of good quality. I hope you will closely identify with images presented. Some making you cry, wince, smile, even laugh. Also, this is not a history of the Vietnam War. It's a story of a small unit that played a large role in a battle that was overwhelming, and a helicopter unit that supplied them their lonely, usually desperate outpost. Many of the pictures are mine, some from squadron mates, others from Marine squadrons I've been friends and brothers with, plus a few official USMC shots and over 50 that I used by an embedded photographer. I have included an interesting story about him. It's with his boonie hat and his trusty camera slipped around his neck. I've also included a full profile of a herd photographer. All opinions are mine alone. I hope this is an interesting, entertaining story for you, even with all the twists and turns I might take. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen. Maybe you've heard of the Tet Offensive of 1968. If not, it was one of the defining battles of the Vietnam War. Commenced on January 30th, 1968, just 9 days after the start of the Battle of Khe Sanh, and 8 days prior to my arrival in country. First of all, what is Tet? For the Vietnamese, Chinese, and all of Southeast Asia, it is a spring celebration of the Lunar New Year. Usually celebrated from late January to mid-February, it's a time of family gathering, special cooking, giving of monetary gifts, banquets, and prayers for the coming year. Per capita, it is bigger than our New Year's celebration on the 4th of July. For most of the previous years of the war, both sides declared a truce so that all could celebrate. The year of 1968 was no exception. As was the custom, in late January, the rural population, mostly farmers, came to the coastal cities in great numbers to celebrate. In October 1967, the North Vietnamese Communist government proposed a truce. January 27th to February 3rd, 1968. Republic of Vietnam accepted their offer. On January 30th, communists violated the ceasefire. Of course they did. They never planned to honor the truce. For months during the lead up to the ceasefire, the Viet Cong guerrillas had infiltrated the major cities in the south. The well-equipped North Vietnamese Army, better known as the NVA, via the Ho Chi Minh Trail, made their first appearance in the south to aid their Viet Cong brothers. Our troops and civilians were viciously attacked. Even with good intelligence, the U.S. and South Vietnamese military were surprised and caught off guard. They simply didn't believe it could happen. Big mistake. The attacks were well organized and deadly. Viet Cong political cadre brought lists with them of those traitors, cruel tyrants, revolutionary elements that had aided the Americans in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the ARVN, which would now be called for our purposes. The Communist first order of business was to round up these traitors, which included ARVN, government officials, politicians, police, teachers, Catholics, foreigners, military officers, and American civilians, and of course missionaries. These were murdered and buried in mass graves throughout the countryside. As many as 6,000 were murdered in the beautiful international city of Hue alone. Many more were led north. The task of the U.S. military and the ARVN was to stop the killing, drive out the enemy, begin to restore and rebuild the mauled South's cities. This map shows the vastness of the coordinated attacks in two waves, from the 30th to 31st January 1968. It's countrywide. To 85,000 peoples of the Army of Vietnam, also known as the North Vietnamese Army, who we'll know as NVA, plus their guerrilla counterpart in the south, the Viet Cong, or the VC, took part. Together they attacked 100 cities and towns, 30 of 44 provisional capitals, 5 of 6 autonomous cities, 70 of 245 district towns. As well as the cities and towns and villages being attacked, many of our armed service bases were hit. Even the smallest fire base might have critical importance to the enemy, were thus attacked and attempts were made to penetrate and destroy them. Another huge battle, the Battle of Khe Sanh, would begin prior to the Tet Offensive on January 21st, 1968. It would officially last for 77 days, making it the longest, deadliest, most controversial battle of the Vietnam War. Khe Sanh and the Tet attacks at Hue City became the events that turned Americans against the war. American people were repeatedly told by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and assured by General Westmoreland, head of all troops in Vietnam, that the enemy was on the run, and I quote, "The end of the war is in sight." End quote. Just days before both the Battle of Khe Sanh and the Tet Offensive, he made these statements. Over 2,000 Marines and allies would be killed in action, securing Khe Sanh, the city of Hue, and their area of operations. Many thousands more would be wounded in action. The enemy would lose over 20,000 killed in action, half of its force at Khe Sanh. Hill 881 South is located within view of the Khe Sanh combat base and is the focus of this PowerPoint presentation. This slide is about saving lives, enemy lives. It's the humanitarian American thing to do, isn't it? And many times the Americans got enemy soldiers, tired of the harsh communist way of life, come to our side and cooperate with us to rid the country of their brutal cohorts. Repatriation of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army to the government of South Vietnam is called Chu Hoi. It's a very, very successful program with nearly 200,000 Viet Cong coming over to the democratic government. The North Vietnamese Army were much more rigid and brainwashed up north, and were much less anxious to be turned. However, an NVA lieutenant surrendered the day before the attack at Khe Sanh, with a satchel full of accurate documents and described all phases of the siege. It made a big difference in the Marines' last-minute planning. Regarding this picture, it's important you know, we never knowingly left any wounded enemy or civilian on the battlefield untreated. This is the Chu Hoi program in action. The communist reason for the Tet Offensive is they believed that they would open the eyes of the people to the corruption of the Saigon government. Also that the ARVN would defect and the other citizens would join them in toppling that corrupt government propped up by the United States. Unfortunately for the enemy, this dream was not to be. In the end, the average citizen rejected and hated the terror brought south by the North and supported our retaking and protecting their property. The ARVN never folded or turned against their government. Instead, the North Vietnamese army were soundly defeated, and the Viet Cong were never a serious resistance organization again. In fact, many VC took advantage of the Chu Hoi program, meaning open arms. These were captured Viet Cong that were willing to switch sides and become translators, scouts, and informants for us against the existing VC. They did good work, and many American and ARVN lives were saved out on patrol. Chu Hoi were exceptional at recognizing booby traps, locating weapons stores, and translating sensitive intel for our troops. They knew all of the VC's tactics after all. They'd been one. This image is of a Chu Hoi interrogating an enemy soldier and translating for an American intelligence officer. As I mentioned before, prior to the Tet Offensive, the Battle of Khe Sanh began on January 21st, 1968. Forces from the NVA carried out a massive artillery bombardment of the U.S. Marine garrison at Khe Sanh. The base was located in the extreme northwest corner of South Vietnam, near the Laotian border. For the next 77 days, U.S. Marines and their South Vietnamese allies, an elite ARVN Ranger Battalion, fought off an intense siege of the combat base. Meanwhile, with U.S. and South Vietnamese forces' attention focused on Khe Sanh, the North Vietnamese Army and the guerrilla force in the south, the Viet Cong, launched the Tet Offensive throughout the rest of the country. This story is about the hills surrounding the base, one in particular, again, Hill 881 South. This outpost was absolutely essential to the survival of the combat base. Thus, it needed to be protected and saved at all costs. Many historians and strategists believe the entire attack on Khe Sanh was a distraction from the Tet Offensive to keep the U.S. from noticing the enemy's infiltration into the South. Others even believe that it was the intention of the communist leaders to humble and embarrass the ARVN and its U.S. ally, to defeat in exactly the way it did to the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Similarity of both battles, except the winner, of course, is striking. This slide is of Khe Sanh today, inside the Marine perimeter. C-130 and trench liner on communist static display for tourists. I can't believe it. As early as 1962, the U.S. Military Command Vietnam, known by the acronym MACV, established an Army Special Forces camp where the red arrow is at Lang Bay, near the small village of Khe Sanh in the upper northwest corner of South Vietnam. You might want to Google Lang Bay for a very exciting and heroic story. Camp was put there for the purposes of monitoring and calling in U.S. airstrikes to halt the infiltration of enemy forces into Laos. Also to provide a base for launching patrols into Laos to monitor the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Finally, to serve as the westernmost anchor for defense along the demilitarized zone on the north. The intel value was so valuable, the CIA had a large presence there. During this same time frame, the Marines, Special Forces, CIA, and primarily the Special Forces at Lang Bay Intelligence learned that the North Vietnamese Army was using the Ho Chi Minh Trail as their personal freeway. They were flooding the trail with tons of troops and supplies meant for attack and destabilization of the South. The flow became so overwhelming that in 1966, Marines were ordered to build a base around an old French runway adjacent to the Special Forces camp at Lang Bay. In early 1967, the Marines' position was reinforced to regimental strength, that meaning 3,000 to 4,000 men. Eventually, a total of 6,000 Marines plus support troops would man the base and surrounding hills. Sporadic combat between the NVA and Marines took place until October 1967, while the Communists had quietly increased their forces in the area to a total of 2 infantry divisions, 2 artillery regiments including anti-aircraft guns, and an armed regiment. These forces, including support troops, even tanks, totaled 40,000 men plus reinforcements. These were first-rate troops, not Viet Cong. Again, the North Vietnamese army were spoiling for conquest of the American base, as they had done to the French in 1954, throwing them completely off the continent forever. From the air, you can see how pristine the combat base was in early 1966. Here's Khe Sanh sitting on a beautiful high plateau. There was a Shangri-La feeling to the place. The sharp drop-off at the eastern end, allowing the enemy the opportunity to zero their guns in on the runway. Also, once the battle began, they would crawl up the sharp drop-off to shoot at the planes from beneath. The old French dirt runway was paved and lengthened from 1,900 feet to 3,900 feet. A taxiway, parking area, and turnaround were added at the western end. Here it shows two large C-130 transports are in the parking area, and everything is peaceful and quiet. No artillery, mortar, or rocket craters yet. The North Vietnamese army was busy, nonetheless. There wasn't even a proper defense yet around the perimeter around the base. The base was located near the old French coffee plantations and hunting lodges, where Asian tigers used to be hunted. All was very serene. Khe Sanh Plateau and Valley was one of the most beautiful, remote places on the earth at that time. This overhead view shows the black, old, but newly repaired French runway on the right, and the new parking area, extended runway, and turnaround at the western end. Soon all of the runway area will be covered with steel matting. This picture shows better than the last one did about the repaired runway. Now it's easy to see the sharp drop-off at the eastern end. All takeoffs and landings took place at the eastern end. Because of the heavy enemy fire once the battle began, many wounded aircraft ended up in the narrow valley below, 400 feet over the edge. The white that appears to be covering the ground, it's not snow. It's heavy but broken low clouds, as you will see later in the presentation. Vietnam has some interesting weather. This is the Khe Sanh combat base circa late 1967. No worries here. The big airplane is shut down, no incoming, the buildings are still standing, and all of the pilots, crew, and Marines are milling around. Just like it was another day in paradise. This is another sign of the American nonchalance prior to January 21st. Marines are unloading an Air Force C-130 while the crew chat. Notice a second C-130 right behind this one, parked too close for what things were about to become. Its nose is barely visible behind the nose of the one in the foreground. Note the red soil color. This slide is not retouched. This is the actual color. Some of the richest soil in the world. Those that served there would never forget the red clay. Like the previous photo, this image of the base was taken in October 1967 prior to the siege. Note all the living and working quarters were still above ground. Two big transports are parked on the ground with white arrows. Next to 6 parked helicopters, red arrows. 2 small observation birds, O1 bird dogs, are the yellow arrows. They're all parked. They're all just sitting out there in the open. Soon all of this would change in the blink of an eye. The attacks on Khe Sanh and its supporting hill outposts. Khe Sanh was situated on Route 9, major east-west highway. Highway was a very generous descriptor of the mostly dirt and overgrown one-lane road. Early, prior to the battle, Marine truck convoys resupplied the base via Route 9. Because of the heavy NVA concentrations, the road became impassable. Beside their massive presence, the NVA and the water destroyed all the bridges. The only way anything got to the combat base now in November 1967 was by helicopter or airplane. The base was surrounded and on an island. Enemy's goal was to strangle resupply and overrun the base with its superior numbers and overwhelming artillery just a few miles away in Laos. This slide illustrates the picture of the Northern I Corps of South Vietnam in 1968. You may want to refer back to it during the rest of the story to keep the areas and names clear in your mind. This whole area of operation is as it was in January 1968. Its significance dramatically changed the direction of the war, both in Vietnam and at home. Questions will remain forever about the Battle of Khe Sanh. Every yellow highlight is controlled by Marines. It took many months and lives to gain and hold that control. The big red arrows across the Laotian border is where over 130 North Vietnamese cannon were located, shooting at will into the hills, combat base, and the entire Khe Sanh Valley. Note, by now the enemy has blocked Route 9 for ground resupply. Note, close proximity of Hill 881 south to the Laotian border and the North Vietnamese guns. Also to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It's the closest up the hills to both. Remember, after January 21st, 35 to 40,000 enemy appeared, roaming, attacking, and constantly probing where this entire area depicted, looking for openings in the Marines' defenses. They had many hundreds of reinforcing troops just a mile from the Laotian border. The Marines made sure that the NV were always hunted and attacked whenever detected. I will re-show this map later for more clarity further into the story. The reasons for the base were many. One reason to reconnoiter and even interdict NVA troops and materials coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Another was to provoke the NVA to fight a conventional pitched battle with us and destroy him with superior weapons, especially U.S. air power. With lots of NVA contact by patrols and some decent intel on the areas surrounding the base, these Marines were anticipating some kind of an attack, not to the level they anticipated. This was the calm before the storm. Unfortunately, these above-ground defenses couldn't afford nearly enough protection when the shooting finally started. The men began to dig. Eventually, they dug trenches 9 to 10 feet deep. The volume of enemy fire was extraordinary. Navy Seabees got involved in the build-up of the defense, too. You can see the improvement in the building techniques compared to what the Marines were doing. However, the overall easy attitude was widespread prior to the 21st of January. Then all hell broke loose. This is the post office at the base, semi-dug in, yet, as you can see, yet exposed before the opening attack. Sending and receiving mail from home would soon undergo major changes. Mail would leave and arrive via helicopter or transport aircraft, usually under enemy fire. Regardless of the importance of the mail to troop morale, sometimes it became impossible to send and deliver during high volume of enemy fire. Note the sandbag bunkers in the background, outside of still standing tents. Temporarily. No special delivery soon. And all hell did break loose. The ammo dump was hit the first day of battle at 4 a.m. It burned and exploded for 3 days. Over 1,500 tons of artillery shells cooked off and countless cases of personal defense weapons, grenades, M16 ammo, recoilless rifle ammo, bazooka rounds, etc. Where 90% of the base's ammo was gone. What are they going to do now? Route 9 was closed down indefinitely. The only way to resupply the Marines now was via runway and the airplanes landing. This is another slide that shows day one of the incoming at Khe Sanh. It became easy to see that the enemy was getting more accurate with each salvo. Its fire was overwhelming. Many of the hooches and huts were still standing in the picture. This base was leveled within the next week. This Air Force C-130 is about to rotate on takeoff. It's almost hit by incoming on the port wing. Wow. Shortly after the destruction of most of the ammo at Khe Sanh, the Air Force immediately jumped in with many different types of airplanes to resupply the Marines. All of their cargo planes, of course, needed to be of the STOL type. Short takeoff and landing, because of the short runway. After the attack on the base began, the runway at Khe Sanh was called the most dangerous place on Earth. It wasn't hyperbole. The landing aircraft were shot at as they began their descent of the base. It didn't end until a plane or chopper was out of shooting range after takeoff. Some planes were shot down on the way in, others destroyed on the ground taxiing, and others on their climb out. Marines on the ground called Khe Sanh the duck farm. They certainly were sitting ducks. This is another Air Force C-130. So many got shot up and destroyed on the Khe Sanh runway and taxiways, the Air Force quit landing them on Khe Sanh for a short while because of the high replacement cost, $2.5 million in 1967 dollars, the loss of crewmen and excessive damage to the aircraft. Because the C-130 was absolutely essential for the resupply at the base. How would the base and hills continue to be resupplied? In a very short time, the base's ammo was replaced. Thankfully, the Air Force developed this tactic shown here known as LAPES, L-A-P-E-S, Low Altitude Parachute Extraction System, where the pilot flew the aircraft down the center of the runway at 5 feet and 130 knots, lowered the rear ramp to half position. The forward motion of the aircraft, coupled with the power of the chutes, pulled the load off the ramp and onto the ground. Don't get the idea that the enemy wasn't shooting at them, just blasting down the runway. They never quit shooting. Marines called them murder magnets and rocket bait. This was some great Air Force flying, though. This is yet another C-130 Lockheed Hercules making a LAPES delivery. This slide really emphasizes how low the Air Force pilots could go. The previous load looks like hard surface aluminum runway matting, used to repair the runway and for bunker reinforcement. All heavy items were delivered in this manner. Each pallet was usually around 4,000 to 10,000 pounds. Even an M551 Sheridan-like tank, 30,000 pounds, could be delivered this way. Lighter, more sensitive supplies, like medical supplies or electronics, were delivered by what the Air Force called a Container Delivery System, or CDS. This occurred when a C-130 would fly over the base at 500 to 600 feet, push the loads off the rudders of the aircraft to its prescribed zone on the ground. In bad weather, the aircraft had radar that would mark the drop spot. The 726 CDS drops, only 3 landed outside the zone, which meant the enemy was usually the benefactor. Not bad Air Force flying, I would say. During the combat base in the hills, the daily minimum resupply requirement was 185 tons per day. By the end of the siege, the U.S. Air Force delivered 14,350 tons of supplies by the CDS method. The rest were via LAPES, well above the daily requirement. On February 23rd, the record was set. The base at Khe Sanh was hit by 1,307 incoming enemy rounds. During the siege, the enemy fired between 25,000 and 30,000 rounds at the base. The image of this shocked Marine during the battle had what men of war called the 1,000-yard stare. Many men suffered with this condition. Our warriors were shocked and paralyzed by the volume and duration of fire they were forced to endure, also having to witness and be part of the raw carnage of war. This condition could be temporary or lead to years of suffering from the traumas they endured. Our men shot at their weapons at an enemy they rarely, if ever, saw. We even gave it a diagnosis and a name: post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And in every war since the beginning of time, have suffered under its spell and control. Prior to Vietnam, there was always a "thou shalt not speak about such things" attitude. The intelligence gathering was so rich in content, and the combat base so close to Laos and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that a great many spooks came to KCSB. Spooks meaning Green Berets, CIA, MACV's Special Operations Group, Special Forces Ultra Secret Project Delta, Marines 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, and even the Air Force's Aerial Reconnaissance Project ran covert operations out of the combat base. They all thought they were ready for an attack. They weren't, and were thus shocked at the intensity of the attack. Note the yellow arrows, which mark the new perimeter of the base. This is a Navy A-7F Corsair II loaded for attacking targets in North Vietnam. At the beginning of the siege, General Westmoreland, again overall commander of the American forces in Vietnam, initiated Operation Niagara, which required that any aircraft returning from a mission were North Vietnam with unexpended ordnance and enough fuel Must check in with the Khe Sanh Direct Air Support Center, or DASC, DASC, before dropping the load in the sea. Remember, a Navy aircraft could not land aboard a ship armed. At this time, the monsoon weather up north was often overcast and too poor to hit designated targets accurately. In February 1968, 74% of Navy carrier sorties planned against North Vietnam were redirected around Khe Sanh and the hills. Niagara was a good name for this operation, as it was designed to keep a 24/7 flow of constant air power, attacking the NVA around Khe Sanh and the hills. Eventually, the airspace over Khe Sanh Valley was said to resemble a beehive, with a large number of aircraft involved. Because President Lyndon Johnson deemed the Battle of Khe Sanh and its hills to have top priority on all U.S. air assets in Southeast Asia, Operation Niagara became the overriding protection against the loss of the base. For instance, B-52s would sortie from Guam, Thailand, and Okinawa to loose their devastation on the enemy. On average, every 90 minutes, a minimum of one 3-plane cell would be directed by a controller to our particular target around Khe Sanh and the valley. Initially, the Air Force would not let their pilots drop any closer than 5,000 meters to friendlies. The enemy soon figured out there was this cushion. They would hide themselves and supplies within the 5,000 meters. Marines on the ground had other ideas. The B-52s were so accurate, the enemy so close to their perimeter or wire, that Marine commanders gave coordinates to drop up only 50 meters from their positions. This killed many of the enemy, as well as destroying his precious supplies. Air Force arc lights, as these were called, strikes delivered a total of 59,542 tons of ordnance during the siege. This picture illustrates the results of multiple B-52 arc lights around Khe Sanh. The attacks were usually by a minimum of 3 aircraft, a cell, with each B-52 dropping 50,000 pounds of iron bombs. That is, 64 500-pound bombs, 24 750-pound bombs. The Air Force did this around the clock, effectively slowing down the overwhelming force of the NVA. Many of the enemy were crushed and killed in their caves and small fighting holes. Many more were driven nearly insane by losing control of all bodily functions. Burst eardrums, destroyed internal organs, inability to even walk after an arc light passed. After such an attack, some merely walked away aimlessly, deserted, and melted into the surrounding countryside. Many of these were killed by Marine ground weapons. Hill 881 South got a lot of benefit from this bombing. The enemy's forces were fast and relentless. The big bombers would make their drops as close as the base of the hills. Their accuracy was amazing. This is an arc light drop as photographed by one of our passing helicopters. We saw many and were in awe each time. As a witness, the sound at 3,000 feet roars like an earthquake and is louder than any whining transmission sitting right over our pilots' heads on our aircraft. You can actually see the earth move and shock waves rising off the hits. A cell would leave a trail of destruction 1 mile long by a half-mile wide. This particular arc light took place right outside the wire or the perimeter of the base at Khe Sanh. The enemy had trench lines right up to our perimeter. The B-52 pilots flew their mission from 25 to 30,000 feet, thus were silent flying over. The NVA had no idea when they were coming, so lived in fear they would be caught out in the open when an attack began. A foxhole or spider hole did little to shelter them from destruction anyway. The B-52s showed up every 90 minutes, sometimes in a bigger configuration than a single cell, maybe 2, 3, 4 cells at a time. Whatever the ground forces called for, they got. Look at the vastness of these attacks over the ground. This is what the terrain looked like after a couple trips over the same area would kill or mess up anything in the neighborhood. After the siege was over, General Westmoreland said that the B-52s were the main reason the Battle of Khe Sanh was won. He and LBJ gave the ground commanders carte blanche concerning these attacks. This slide is actually of men on 881 South, appreciating from a distance the B-52 arc light raid, its overwhelming power against the enemy. Black Arrow. This bomb was taking place on the Korok mountain range, where the majority of communist guns shooting at them at the base were located. This was across the fence, as was said in Laos. As I mentioned earlier, prior to expanding the base and the battle that was to come, the surrounding 5 hills needed to be taken from the North Vietnamese Army, secured by the Marines. Control of the high ground was imperative. In Marine Corps parlance, these were called strategic elevations. Combat base sat at the bottom of a bowl. Anyone setting on any one of the hills could see their every move made at the base. Our enemy could shoot us like fish in a barrel. Also, the hills provided intelligence, a high ground first line of defense, and a buffer between the enemy's artillery, the valley below. If the enemy were allowed to keep the hills in their possession, Khe Sanh would never hold. The campaign to take back control of the hills was named the Hill Fights. Also, the first Battle of Khe Sanh, as we mentioned. Taking back the hills cost the Marines dearly. The battles raged from April 24th to May 10th, 1967, costing 155 Marines killed in action, 424 wounded in action. The North Vietnamese Army lost 940 killed in action. This Marine is organizing the body bags of those killed in action heading home. Later, the defense of the hills, Marines would pay an even greater price to hold them. During this presentation, I'm going to enclose some footnote stories to the story that will hopefully enhance your understanding of how so many factors randomly and sometimes with great purpose overlapped each other. These stories within a story took place during this and every other war ever fought. Consider this the first footnote story. This is the end of part 1. This slide and the next one are illustrative of one of the best, most awarded and courageous combat photographers of the war. This image was taken during the hill fights, specifically at 881 South in early May 1967, and by a woman. In fact, she was the only woman photographer in country from 1966 to 68. While in country, she was usually in combat. It took some retaking of Hill 881 South. Just another picture taken by that woman photographer who was there when it happened and climbed up the hill with the men. This footnote story is about a 5-foot-tall, 85-pound photojournalist named Catherine Leroy. She's part of this story because she was almost everywhere I was during the Tet Offensive of 1968. Her story is so compelling, her picture is so famous, and she was at the hill fights with her camera. Here she is with an Army unit prior to the hill fights, believed to be the 101st Airborne. Born in France in 1946, she was determined at age 21 to come to Vietnam and take pictures illustrating compassion, camaraderie, humanity, and even the love between men at war. Growing up in France, hearing about the defeat of her country by the Viet Minh at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, she wanted to see Indochina in this war for herself. She worked 18-hour days as an interviewer in a Paris employment agency owned by her father to save money for a one-way ticket to Saigon, despite her father who told her she couldn't go. She went anyway. She got her one-way ticket, and Leroy arrived in Saigon in February 1966 with an M2 Leica camera, $150, no training, and having never taken a picture. First thing she did was to march into the Associated Press offices to meet with the picture editor, Horst Boss, and demand an assignment. Of course, she lied to him, telling him she was experienced, having never clicked a shutter, and wouldn't take no for an answer. She finally wore him down, and he gave her 3 rolls of black and white film, an assignment, and credentials at the standard rate of $15 for every picture published in periodicals or newspapers. Off to shooting pictures she went. Despite the language barrier, Catherine was always able to catch a ride with the next truck, cab, plane, or helicopter to wherever she needed to go. After learning to take pictures around Saigon, she hooked up with an Army battalion and started going out with them on patrols. Leroy was pushy and aggressive, to say the least. On the picture on the right, note the large boots. Sometimes she traveled and collaborated with another French male art journalist, Francois Béjour, on assignments. Often he wrote the stories and she took the pictures. Here, however, was an exception. A few times she used him to photograph her doing something in the story he was writing. She appears here to be on another patrol, visible just below the barrel of the trooper in the foreground. Note how small she is. No flak vest and no helmet. This image shows Leroy on patrol with the 173rd Brigade in the Ashaw Valley, one of the most dangerous areas of the country. It's a big staging area the NVA used for attacking the cities in South Vietnam. She was not camera shy. It was going to be good for her brand. Here's Catherine's in early operations with the Army. She was always able to insinuate and maneuver herself into any unit she was to cover and become one of the boys as much as possible. Men were always asking her, thinking of their sisters and girlfriends at home, "Why are you here? You don't have to be." On one of her assignments in February 1967, she was to spend time with the Army's 173rd Airborne Brigade. You see her here with a group of the 173rd troops on patrol. Basically, she became a grunt. She cursed like them, ate their food, slept in the boonies, chain smoked, and never asked for special treatment. There's no record of her ever wearing a flak vest, couldn't find one small enough, or a steel pot, same reason. Her shoe size was 4, smallest combat boot was 6. Her feet swam in the 6s, remember? Leroy averaged 3 weeks per month, more time than any other woman journalist, as well as many of the men in the field. The year before Kathy got to Vietnam in 1965, the only other female photographer in the country at that time was Dickie Chappelle. She was killed in combat by a landmine. This is an image of Dickie Chappelle. Catherine is shown here still with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. The airborne in the unit name indicates they were a jump unit. In fact, they only jumped work once during the Vietnam War. Guess who wanted to go along and take part in that jump? Leroy earned her parachutist license as a teenager in France and had jumped 84 times. She was revered by her editors in Saigon because she almost always got the results they wanted when chasing a story. Sometimes she would stumble into a better story than assigned and follow the better one. No one complained. Catherine Leroy didn't care who she challenged to get her story. She had her press credentials temporarily suspended after emotionally yelling and swearing at a Marine colonel who she thought was condescending, denying her request to jump shortly after she had jumped with the 173rd. He subsequently sent her back to Saigon, set her down for 6 months suspension. Apparently, Leroy learned enough curse words in English from the grunts. She served with the cuss out a colonel. Here's an image of the day that I mentioned she was fearless. In this image, Catherine looks a little less enthused about her decision to jump, but did. She was so light the Army parachute riggers needed to weigh her down with extra weight so she wouldn't blow away too far from the landing zone. She not only jumped but took many photos on the way down. 173rd's only combat jump of the war was part of Operation Junction City and took place on February 22nd, 1967. To say that Catherine Leroy was tough and feisty would be an understatement. She was impossible with her parents. Thus had been raised in a convent and knew how to fight and take care of herself. Here she is waiting to be transported to Saigon after her dealings with the colonel. The Marine in the corner was stationed there to make sure she got on the plane to Saigon. When her suspension was up, 3 months early, I might add, Leroy heard that there was heavy fighting going on in I Corps, up north. So she caught a ride of the action. The action was the hill fights. Upon receiving back her credentials, Leroy conned her way aboard a Marine helicopter at Dong Ha and found herself on Hill 81 South at the beginning of the hill fights. Her photos there were instantly reproduced in a huge spread in Life magazine. Her reputation was made. This photo by Leroy is of Marine J.K. Johnson, wounded in the taking back of Hill 881 South in the spring of 1967. He's wearing his Wounded in Action tag. A Navy corpsman filled out detailing his condition. J.K. is on his way to a helicopter landing zone to be lifted to the rear and a hospital. Catherine's nickname on Hill 881 South was GNAT, Nat of the Hills. As great a study as this image is on men and war, this, however, was not the award-winning photo. Without the following ones, it would have been. This series of 3 images, named Corpsman in Anguish, were shot by Leroy on 881 South. They were taken without a motor-driven camera, just shot quickly by hand. Her editor, Horst Foss, said, "These images were the essence of Leroy in Vietnam. She often said she wanted to show the humanity in the face of inhumanity of war in her pictures. Here the corpsman is applying major pressure to staunch the bleeding." Foss also said, "These were the finest shots she submitted." End quote. In this image, Navy Corpsman Vernon Doc White is applying as much pressure as possible to the throat wound this Marine has suffered. He's listening for a heartbeat. One of his best friends, Lance Corporal William Rock Roldan, was the victim. Acknowledging his friend is dead, Wyke is looking where the sniper shot from, and is in anger, despair, disbelief, and shock at the death of his comrade. He picked up his M16 shortly afterwards and began running up the hill behind him toward the enemy, shouting, "I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to kill them all." Leroy would meet Wyke for the first time many years later. She would win the George Polk Award for photography for these images taken in 1967. Two weeks after the hill fights were won, Catherine went on another dangerous Marine recon patrol mission in the Vietnamese Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ. DMZ was on the north-south border of Vietnam. On May 19, 1967, while photographing this mission, Leroy was severely wounded in the neck and chest by an NVA mortar round. She said the only words she heard after the blast were, "I think she's dead, Sarge." The blast tore open her chest with dozens of pieces of shrapnel hitting her, also breaking her jaw. Destroyed her cameras, and later, Leroy would credit her cameras with saving her life by stopping most of the shrapnel. She was evacuated to the Navy's hospital ship, USS Sanctuary, located about 2 miles offshore of South Vietnam. There, she was visited by future Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Lewis Walt. The Marines loved her. Leroy was then transferred to a large military hospital at Da Nang. Was discharged from there in mid-June, spending some time recovering, then returning to the war. Always running toward the sound of the guns, she was at the front at the beginning of the Tet Offensive. This time she caught a ride to Hue, like Khe Sanh, one of the most dangerous places in the world. This is images of Catherine evacuated on a stretcher. Catherine Leroy's reputation continued to grow during the rest of 1967. She was seemingly everywhere at once. Her editors and the news agencies loved it, as their reputation for first-person reporting grew with her successes. And in early February 1968, she turned up, covering the Tet Offensive from the city of Hue. Before she and Francois Mazur went into the city, they wisely agreed not to wear their combat greens and changed into civilian clothes. The quickest way to die in the city of Hue was to look like a Marine. Here, perceived as being just tourists with cameras, she photographed North Vietnamese soldiers fake shooting into an abandoned Marine tank and rummaging through the inside. She and Monsieur were left alone. Unfortunately, her good luck ran out, and she and Monsieur were kidnapped and held hostage by the NVA soldiers. She's pictured here with their captors looking pretty somber, not yet knowing the outcome of their predicament. As I mentioned at the beginning of this story, murder, local civilians in Hue was all around them. Then her luck returned. Initially, the NVA tied their arms behind them, took her cameras, but didn't damage them. The NVA also captured a French couple with 2 children that began commiserating with Kathy and Francois. Speaking of the NVA in French, Leroy convinced the enemy that the 6 of them were of no danger to the cause. They were all French citizens and journalists, thus non-political, and said it was a good idea to tell her story in a favorable way. Pictured as the lieutenant in charge of the situation, Leroy convinced him how good it would be for the communist esteem and reputation if he, through his great humanity, would let her photograph his cadre and ultimately let them all go so she could turn over her rolls of film to the world's media, like, good PR for the NVA. The North Vietnamese Army lieutenant relented and let Leroy shoot the photos she wanted. There was only one problem. One of the NVA soldiers didn't want his picture taken and printed in conjunction with the story of the kidnapping and demanded that Catherine give him the roll of film. Canister. She played a sleight of hand trick, supposedly removing the film roll from the camera and gave the man an empty roll. As you can see, the trick worked. The story appeared with a 10-page spread plus cover in the February 16, 1968 issue of Life magazine. Adding to their good fortune, all were released and Catherine and Monsieur found a church and hid out with other frightened civilian families, where Catherine took this most expressive picture. This picture was entitled Oscar Getting a Haircut, but it's not one of Catherine's images. This picture was taken at the Khe Sanh combat base during a lull in the fighting. A Marine is looking at the Life magazine spread by Leroy during her adventure with the NVA during the Battle of Hue. Word of her photos and guts traveled fast. Catherine had spent 3 years with almost 15 months in constant combat situations when she finally left Vietnam. She admitted to having difficulty readjusting to civilian life. PTSD didn't have a name back then, but Leroy admitted taking years to put many of her experiences behind her. She won countless journalism photographic awards for her work that made her proud. Still, she was restless. Finally, she was ready to go back to what she did. The Beirut-Lebanon War of 1982 got her into another combat photojournalist role. Her work was again very effective, respected, and awarded. This shot was from the Civil War in Lebanon. Catherine never seemed afraid to get too close to the action. She continued to push herself as close to the shooting as possible. Unlike the previous image, this is where she preferred to be, right next door to the shooter. Leroy never wanted to be late for a gunfight. Then, right out of the blue in 2004, Paris Match magazine commissioned Catherine to interview and photograph Vernon White. Vernon was photographed here in a rented apartment in Colorado. This would be Leroy's last photo assignment. When Doc returned from Vietnam in 1968, he was unwounded but troubled. He said that the series of 3 pictures Catherine took made him remember that day vividly, caused him to lose sleep for nearly 40 years. He was married 4 times and had 2 daughters he never spoke to. White had lived most of his life by himself, living on a $325 monthly pension. In 2003, he accidentally shot himself with a gun he carried in his pocket. In 2004, the house he was living in burned to the ground, hence the rented apartment. 2 days after Leroy took this picture, White suffered a stroke that paralyzed his body and cost him his sight. He then moved to live with his sister somewhere in the Midwest. Vernon, said Leroy, is haunted. He died March 28, 2016 in Kirkland, Washington. He was 58 years old. Here Vernon looks at copies of their encounter that memorable day in 1967, brought to him by Leroy. Although she kept in contact with him through the years, this was the first time they met. His tattoos reflected the names of many of the men he treated or were killed on 881 South. Catherine Leroy was considered the most daring and bravest photographer of the war. She had little money, so she stayed in the field. Again, I will repeat this little saying here. She ate sea rations with the troops, learned English by listening to them curse and talk. Of course, she smoked like a chimney and slept where the troops slept. She returned to Vietnam in 1975 to cover the end of the war. For a cover story on Leroy in the December 1988 issue of American Photography, Catherine explained the draw of war photography. I quote, "I've always found that it was very exhilarating to be shot out without results," she said. "It's the biggest high of all. A massive rush of adrenaline, a high you can experience in times of great danger, is a high you can't experience anywhere else." By the late 80s, the physical and psychological toll of 2 decades of combat photography had begun to wear on Leroy, and she grew sick of war. She often became depressed and felt alone with her demons. In a war in the late 20th century, the easiest subject to photograph is a bleeding corpse. The real genius is to take a picture of a living person without a drop of blood showing, and recording the suffering in a single human face. She was determined to capture the human aspect of war. This is what Kathleen Leroy's pictures did. In 1967-68, she won the George Polk Awards, Picture of the Year Award, the Sigma Delta Chi Award, the Art Directors Club of New York Award. Catherine was the first woman to receive the Robert Capa Gold Medal for her work in the Lebanese Civil War in 1976. This is Catherine later at home. She dabbled in producing short documentaries, supporting other artists, clothing and furniture design, and the art community of New York. Finally, she moved to Santa Monica, California. Leroy wrote some books, Shooting Under Fire with Peter Howe, Under Fire, God Cried, You Don't Belong Here with Elizabeth Becker, and participated in The Greatest War Photographer You've Never Heard of, by Elizabeth Herman. Her movies were Operation Last Patrol, Kathy at War, Close Up on War. In Santa Monica, she owned a small boutique, retail women's clothing store, designing some of the clothes and importing others from all over the world. I never found any info about her lifestyle, family, husband, children, etc. Due to her lifelong addiction to smoking, she died in Santa Monica of lung cancer in 2008. Catherine Leroy was only 60 years old. Thank you for your patience. This footnote is over. Back to the original story. The Hill Circle were the only ones occupied by Marines. 881 South was the last hill taken, was the closest to the Laotian border, and NBA guns, of course, plus suffered the most casualties. It was 7 miles from the Khe Sanh base. It was manned by the most Hill Marines and had the largest useful surface area. Well, here it is, the hero of the story, Hill 881 South. This is the hill my squadron primarily resupplied. Hill 881 South had first priority. We serviced their every need when able, even in marginal weather. This image shows us an uncharacteristically clear day for this time of year in northern I Corps. Many times during our missions, 881 South looked like the hills in the background, their top completely opaque in cloud cover during the monsoon season. We often had to fly on instruments to even find the hill without flying into it. More about the weather later. This is an overhead view of 881 South. India Company defended to the right of the saddle, with Mike Company on the left. 3 of the 5 LZs were on the saddle and 2 more on the India side, both showing the yellow arrows. Thus, India took more incoming rounds and casualties than Mike. Note the web of trails up the hill the NVA used at night to attack the Marines in red. Also note the missed mortar, artillery, and rocket craters on the approaches that missed the crest. So many more hit the Marines. On December 26, 1967, about 6 months after Hill 881 South had been secured by the Hill fights, but a month before the major attack on the base began, a captain, Bill Dabney, took India Company, approximately 180 to 200 men, with the 3rd Battalion, 26 Marines, up to the top of Hill 881 South, by now a regimental outpost. He joined Mike Company of the 3rd Battalion as well. By 21 January, the Siege of Khe Sanh had begun. Captain Dabney was a senior officer by date of promotion on the Hill, so he assumed overall command of Indian Mike companies. His full complement with attachments was approximately 400 men, although there were times when, due to casualties and lack of replacements, Hill 881 South got as low as 250 Marines and corpsmen. Again, from December 26 until mid-April 68, Dabney, except for one incident, did not leave his command for over 100 days perched atop that hill. This is a motley bunch of grunts, as you can see. Note the seat out of the pants of the last guy beginning his climb to the top. It's time for another short footnote, but I can assure you important. This image shows 6 India Company Marines lugging an M40 106mm recoilless rifle, one of 2 on top of the hill, up 881 South for the hill's defense and offense. Like Dabney, many of the men spent 100 days on the hill. A few others spent from September 67 in the hill fights and spent over 200 days. 200 days on that hill could be mind-numbing. Designed as an anti-tank weapon during World War II, the M40 recoilless rifle was quickly transformed to be used as a bunker buster, using anti-personnel shells. It only weighed 460 pounds with an effective range of 1 mile and a max range of 4.25 miles. It was the ideal weapon for the Marines on 881 South, as the NVA were well dug in, close in, shooting from inside the bunkers and tunnels, usually much closer than 4 miles away. Every night the NVA were attacking the Marine perimeter wire within 50 to 75 yards of them. The large shell packed a tremendous punch. Needing only 2 men to operate, the Marines loved this weapon. Note the 50 caliber single-shot target marking rifle mounted on the barrel. Marine on one knee is sighting a target with the 50 caliber sight. I've entitled this slide, Socked In. This is one of those many days when weather conditions might have precluded any resupply from our rotary wing community. Conditions like this could last a few days when only the highest hills were above the clouds. This day is one of them. The 888th South Marines would try to lure the NVA into a machine gun duel using the 50 cal guns they'd borrow, outside the supply chain, I might add, from one of the C-46 downed helicopters. The 881 South gunners using the 50 cals would shoot toward the next hill, where the NVA were, until the enemy shot back. The NVA muzzle flashes were easier to spot because Russian gunpowder was flashier than ours. Then blew their guns away with the 106mm recoilless rifle. As I said before, this World War II Korean War weapon became very useful and versatile for the Marines throughout the siege as well as the entire Vietnam War. Many historians say it won the Battle of Hue City during the Tet Offensive of 1968, which began only 10 days after the attacks began on Khe Sanh. Enough of that footnote, back to the story. This is a partial view of the Khe Sanh Valley and the proximity of some of its features. All of these remote outposts were under constant daytime shelling and nighttime ground attack. Note the craters and incoming around the base of the hills. Smoke is from our guns shooting at suspected targets. 40,000 North Vietnamese Army troops were roaming around the area at will. 8 miles away in Laos from the base were the big guns, Soviet artillery, shooting at the base and hills. The guns were dug into caves and moved almost hourly. That made it hard to get a fixed position on them. Only when the enemy would momentarily run out of shells would they slow down the shooting. Ammo replacement was actually easy for them, as they were resupplied at night and always during cloud cover, bad weather, which came often. The enemy kept huge stores of ammunition all along the trail. A little extra chow for our boys. This is one of our crew chiefs tossing a case of sea rations, canned meals, for the troops. We could never do enough for these men. Besides, they were always hungry. Even a spare case or 2 of extra sea rats gave them a lift. I'm not sure why, because a steady diet of this crap could definitely rot your brain or gut. I'll let Captain Dabney tell you the ice cream story later. Crewmen were constantly looking for things they might bring to the Maroon Marines. Few went around to the maintenance departments and scrounged old books and magazines that the men on the hills had no access to. Of course, Playboy and the like were the favorite reading materials. I've included this image of Navy Chaplain Ray Stube conducting a service for the men of 881 South. There were short talks, to be sure. Note the men are breaking a firm order: no helmets. A few days before January 21st, Ray hitched a ride on a chopper from Khe Sanh to 881 South to look in on some of his boys. He was all over the valley, from the base to all of the hills. Anytime he could jump on a chopper, he was off to a different place tending his flock. We knew him because he often helped load wounded and killed in actions on our birds. After 20 years of service, he retired from the Navy as a second-class petty officer. He also became a very widely read author and historian. He co-authored an outstanding book with John Prados called Valley of Decision. He also wrote Battle of Kings, Pebble in My Boots, and The Final Formation. These books detailed all of his experiences at the Battle of Khe Sanh, as well as helping him recover from multiple severe cases, depression, and PTSD. In 1983, he founded the Khe Sanh Veterans Association. This group went a long way in helping many of the men deal with their own memories of the horror they experienced at Khe Sanh and the men of the hills. This is a good picture of the Padre, as they were called, getting a hand up from a Marine. He was a beloved man by the men on 881 South. He always was doing something routine in nature, which was usually heroic. Common phrase on 881 was, stay down and stick around. Staying in a bunker during the day, you just might live. During the siege, there was a variety of things some men did during the daytime. A few had daytime jobs that kept them in the open. Some brought out their issued Bibles and read them. Chaplain Ray encouraged any reading of the good book and faith the men could muster. Lord knows they needed it. Here's a man reading one of those hard-to-come-by reading materials. Even used hometown newspapers, sometimes weeks old, were welcome. Here's more sleeping Marines in what they called a bunny hole. One man is eating lunch. Daytime was reflection time. Most troops slept during the day unless needed for casualty evacuation, such as stretcher bearers, meeting the helicopters, arranging airstrikes. For three reasons. First, most incoming was that during the day, when the NBA could see to adjust fire, thus it was prudent to keep as few Marines exposed as possible. Second, they generally had all hands on deck at night from midnight to dawn, when the NBA attacked their perimeter nightly. They needed to sleep. And third, since all the water had to be flown in at considerable risk, they used less if they slept during the heat of the day. This hit is a near miss in one of the 881 trench lines. The shell struck on top of the left parapet. Both Marines and the photographer taking shelter were lucky. Had it landed 6 inches further right, it would have been in the center of the trench. Both would likely have been killed, and probably even the photographer. Marine putting his arm and body between the other man and the shrapnel was probably wounded by the blast. An heroic move. The zigzag sandbag barrier in the background was one of the many erected in the trench line to prevent multiple casualties when incoming hit the trench. Although it acted as a good buffer and saved lives, the disadvantage was that the barriers made carrying stretchers for any distance in the trench line almost impossible. Rats were another nuisance/problem. This is Navy Corpsman James Mathis. When not treating the wounded grunts, he concentrated on rats. He woke up one day to see a rat on his chest. The rat just stared at him. A few days later, a rat wriggled into Mathis's hair. Enough, said Mathis. He created a blowpipe. In the darkness of his bunker, he waits for a sound. He turns on his flashlight and uses the blowgun. So far, he says, I've killed 5 rats plus 1 probable. A rat that fled with a dart in its side. Here's Mathis again. He thought the blowpipe not efficient enough, so he built a crossbow to kill him better. Can a person go nuts in this type of day-to-day environment? You bet. The daytime, if not with a specific assignment, the men had time on their hands. Unlike Mathis, most use it wisely by reading or slept. I've entitled this slide, Tackling Marines Off the Helicopters. These 5 jarheads loved their job. Captain Dabney called them his linebackers. Continuing problem was replacement Marines. They're often newbies in country without a clue about the reality of war in Vietnam, let alone the strangeness of 881. They'd come down the ramp of a CH-46, stand around gawking like tourists. The sure way to catch the next bird out is as it killed in action. 881 South set up a gang of their toughest to tackle them, NFL style, and throw them into the nearest trench. The new battalion CO, a lieutenant colonel, came up to visit the hill and got tackled and thrown into a trench. After initially getting downright angry, he saw the reality of 881 South and thanked these tough guys for saving his butt. This is Captain William H. Bill Dabney. Captain Dabney tells the story of the only day he was off the hill. I quote, "Near the end of the siege, I was near a zone when a bird came in with the replacements, and I became part of the linebacker detail. One replacement slipped on the ramp coming out and got his leg hung up around the ramp lift mechanism. The ramps were always wet and slick because the bird had been up so high to avoid anti-aircraft fire and had gotten cold. As it came down, condensation would form on the metal surfaces, including the ramp. I got him free, pushed him down the ramp, but by the time I'd done so, the bird had lifted too high for me to jump. I went to the crew chief, told him I was the Hill's commanding officer, needed to go back. He didn't believe me, and I don't blame him. I had no rank insignia on, not a good idea to wear around North Vietnamese gunners. Hadn't bathed or shaved in 3 months. Black jacket was so worn the plates were falling off, and trousers were so rotten my crotch was split, and I was indecent. The pilots were busy dodging anti-aircraft fire, and battalion commanding officer was back on the hill. So I said, to hell with it. Let them drop me off at KCSB, the base. First time I'd been off the base since before the siege. God, that shower and shave felt good. Went back up the next day, got a lot of good-natured grief about deserting my post. Told him that it was the Purple Fox's fault, not mine. This is an image of what the hill was all about. By now, everyone has all moved in and cozy. Built a large radio antenna in the middle center, used to relay intelligence info to the base to control airstrikes and artillery fire, the protection of the hills, the base and themselves. It's a great fire base as long as you didn't have to live there. Sergeant Joseph Jones said, "There's only 2 ways to get off of Hill 81, flown off or blown off." Prophetic to say the least. One incident, which almost resulted in everyone getting blown off the hill, came in the form of a request from the combat base to provide a complete ammunition count for the hill immediately. Dabney replied they had enough of everything and would let them know when they needed more. He was told it didn't matter, they needed a complete count immediately, as the White House of all people wanted it. It was daytime wandering around the hill in the open. Counting ammo in all the bunkers and holes would have exposed a lot of men for nothing. The captain made up a number. That seemed to make everybody happy. The combat base must have had other orders and started sending up ammo with every resupply, whether Dabney wanted it or not. This became a big problem. Ammo bunkers were so full, they were stacking 105, 106, and 81 millimeter in the open. Such a confined area that a single North Vietnamese round could have blown everyone off the hill. The captain had a heck of a time shutting off the deliveries. By January 21st, it became obvious the above-ground outhouses, or as the Marines called them, crappers, couldn't be utilized anymore. Besides being great targets, the 55-gallon drums cut in half used for receptacles meant that they had to be burned out with diesel or aviation fuel. The smoke brought even more income. This in turn meant the fuel needed to be brought in by helicopter, lengthening the arrival of more important items. Didn't make sense. So Navy Senior Corpsman David Steinberg solved the problem using artillery round canisters placed at strategic locations in the trench lines. Canisters had watertight screw top that would go on the top. Wasn't long before another Marine suggested that the last man to use the commode, as they were called, before it was completely full, insert a grenade with pin pulled into the canister, seal it up tight, pitch it off the hill. The hill was steep, so the canister would bounce a good distance down. Every once in a while, late at night, the men would hear an explosion and screams from down below. It smelled foul, they said, but it was worth it. This is another corpsman tending to a newbie, replacement radio man, wounded just coming off the ramp of one of our birds. Steinberg and the other corpsmen were some of the busiest men on the hill. They were always men to treat, prepare for travel to the rear. Wounded Marines, after being triaged and wounds treated by Doc Steinberg and the other corpsmen, these men must have been moved from a bunker and are waiting in this trench for a medevac chopper ride out. About a third were ambulatory, but most medevacs needed stretchers. Either way, they were situated right next to the LZ, or better protected here in this trench than waiting in the open. As soon as the bird landed, men would move these wounded as soon as possible to the helicopter's ramp, and off they'd go. In most cases, there was one or two Navy hospitalmen or corpsmen on the helicopter to continue care. The doc would fill out a tag and affix it to their uniform, detailing the severity of the wounds, blood type, etc. The men on the hill, as well as the pilots, liked the helicopter and the LZ as little time as possible. Just seconds prior to landing, these men would be staged, waiting at the edge of the chopper's ramp. These men are taking a short stroll on a foggy day. The enemy had no eyes on days like this and afforded a short stroll around the top of the hill, 881 South. In many cases, the men had too much time to think of their situation on 881. They all thought of home if they ever get off that hill alive. One PFC, Ernest Webb, wrote a letter to his pastor, Reverend Anderson. Webb had seen the morale of his fellow Marines waning and suggested a remedy to the pastor, which he named Operation We Care. PFC Webb's church and other organizations responded to the operation that resulted in an abundance of We Care packages arriving at 881 South. The men not only received items Webb requested in his letter, but they also got gin and vodka and plastic baby bottles. A note from a donor, a Korean War veteran, said he remembered what a little joy juice meant to the frontline troops, that they used the plastic bottles because they wouldn't break with rough handling. He said he'd used inverted nipples so the contents wouldn't gurgle when the package was shaken. He said that in Korea, that in-country postal people would take the bottles out of the packages for their own use. He said it was harder to find if the contents didn't gurgle. As Captain Bill stated, I recall one load of incoming mail, several days' worth in fact, where letters were riddled with shrapnel and soaked in whiskey from a broken bottle in one of the We Care packages. Actually, chocolate chip cookies soaked in bourbon weren't bad. Just had to get past the mold. Morale did improve because troops realized folks back home did care. Morale-boosting events weren't limited to actions from people back home. I recall a few events which were initiated by the Purple Foxes. On one of the Super Gaggle resupply birds, the aircrew managed to have several gallons of ice cream stashed in with the ammunition and sea rations. The pilot was so busy dodging anti-aircraft fire upon a delivery, he forgot to advise us of this special commodity. As usual, we waited till dark to retrieve items from the drop zones and found it was melted. Some containers had been punctured by shrapnel, allowing contents to drip down on the remainder of the load. Didn't get to enjoy the treat, but appreciated the thought, end quote. This is the end of part 2. Hang in there. This image is of one of the 105mm howitzer gun crews laughing about a good shot, a good joke, or a little of the joy juice that was getting passed around. Because of the priority put on water usage, nobody shaved, but even then, some of the younger troops couldn't grow facial hair. Here you can see a mix of both. One lieutenant said his whole platoon looked like a gnarly bunch of Vikings. Captain Dabney had lots of troubles with the REGs, rear echelon goons, and Marine regulations. People in the rear had no idea what a huge disconnect, as Dabney put it, there was between them and the Hill 81 South. In his words, he said, "Worst conflict I had with regulations involved 2 KIAs were killed in actions. A round landed in a hole and not much was left. We had no more body bags, so put their remains in ponchos and staged in a zone for the next bird in. The weather went sour and we couldn't get a bird in. By the second day, troops were watching rats crawling around the bodies, hot up there in the daytime with obvious consequences for conditions of bodies. I sent a radio message requesting permission to bury them till we could get them out. Reply, negative. Regs prohibit field burial in RVN, Republic of Vietnam. But I had a serious health and morale problem. Sent a second message explaining problems. Again requested permission to bury. Again denied. As I said before, people who write regulations have never been any place like 881 South. Regulations are written in air-conditioned offices. By the third day with weather 00, I sent a message down saying that unless otherwise directed, I intended to bury the KIAs that evening. I kept a copy of the message so it would be a record for finding them later. Got no reply. Buried them that night. A couple of days later, the weather lifted and the first bird came up to get sling nets. Captain continued, "We had no medevacs because the weather was so bad the NVA couldn't see to shoot either. I couldn't justify the risk of trying to land a bird to pick up permanent routines. In other words, that's sometimes what they call KIAs. We disinterred them, put them in a net and piled other nets and slings on top of them to hide the bodies. Had to do that because of regulations. They said you could not transport remains externally. The bird was a purple fox. Picked up the load. We called as he lifted off and told him he had bodies underneath. He rogered and said nothing more. Apparently he said nothing when he delivered them to Dong Ha either. We never heard any more about it. I'd probably have been relieved or court-martialed over that one if he hadn't kept his mouth shut. Purple Fox people understood. He gave us a lot of help in situations like the one above, simply by knowing circumstances and caring about fellow Marines. They were willing to say nothing and just get on with what had to be done, and to hell with regulations. It was a bit more subtle help than a hot zone medevac, but equally important to our survival. We depended on them for things like that too, even if we couldn't talk about them for 30 years. End quote. The enemy had lots of snipers. 881 South had some too. These two men, sniper and spotter, shot back. The NVA thought because they had overwhelming numbers of troops and weapons and the upper hand in every situation, they got careless, thinking they were immune to getting sniped at. Our snipers equaled their fire. The NVA were shocked by the Marines' ability to hit them when they perceived themselves safe. Marine snipers could be as deadly from 1,500 yards as they were at 500 yards, and maybe beyond if necessary. This one is set up on the north slope of 881, looking for an enemy forward observer, or an FO, who was thought to be calling in artillery shots at them. One of the most serious and enforced orders on 881 South was to always have on your helmet and flak vests when outside a bunker. Well, at least this young man is wearing a flak vest. This young man is taking his turn on tube watch. 80 millimeter, 120 round makes a loud pop as the shell gets to the bottom of the mortar tube and fires. Much easier to hear the pop sound without your helmet on and be able to warn others of incoming. Just another trick to get a small jump on the enemy. When the weather got bad, and it got bad often, the NVA couldn't see, so they took some time to refit, rearm, and get amped up for their attacks in better weather. Likewise, the men of 881 South walked the hill to repair communication wire blown up by incoming and helicopters, sometimes setting loads on the perimeter's barbed wire, breaking it. Everywhere there were empty ammo boxes filled with red clay soil or rocks, plus lots of sandbags. There was never enough padding for one's bunker. The men weren't kidding about the street sign either. On a flat plateau and surrounded by mountains, the Khe Sanh combat base was in a hole and often foggy and misty. 881 South, the tallest of the hills and sometimes clear, was then passed the task to control airstrikes throughout the valley below. So when Khe Sanh was socked in or did not have an air FAC, which was a airborne forward air controller, overhead, Marine Direct Air Support Center, or DASC, would pass the Niagara flights off to 881 South to coordinate. The hill got lots of flights sent their way courtesy of Operation Niagara, as the weather was often marginal up north for bombing during the monsoon season. The men on the hill had plenty of targets and tailored the type of ordnance to the target selected. The Hill 881 Marines also had the capability of marking those spots with 81 millimeter mortars, which they had 3, 105 millimeter howitzers, 3 and then 2, and the 106 millimeter recoilless rifles, of which they had 2. Note the flat tire on this 105 millimeter howitzer would be hit again and destroyed during the battle. One of their most important assets in the defense of the hill was access to fixed-wing fighter jets, Marine fighter jets, located at the Marine Corps Air Station at Chulai. Again, because of the new orders from General Westmoreland, meaning Operation Niagara, more of these types of weapon systems were available and released to the men of 881 from the Navy and Air Force. The plan was to destroy and disrupt the enemy and his guns with jet fighter bomber attacks during the day, and thus confuse and play havoc with his plans for the night attacks. 881 could not exist without these air assets. Whose job would it be to control and facilitate this action? Well, this young man on the phone. This young man happened to be Corporal Robert J. Arata, USMC. Marine infantry units, usually at the company level, in combat have a ground forward air controller, or a FAC, attached to them to control all close air support, or CAS, for the unit. He's a Marine officer aviator, usually a captain with a minimum of 6 months combat flying in country, and then serve on temporary duty with the unit for 3 months. The FAC at 881 South was wounded and medevaced out on the second day of his FAC duty. Captain's evacuation came on 22nd January, the beginning of the siege. Captain Dabney said, at about the same time the weather socked in, but several days before we could bring in a helicopter. When it did clear, we got the radio batteries we needed to talk to the close air support aircraft, but no FAC. When I remarked on the lack of a FAC, Bob told me he could handle it, meaning Corporal Arata. I had nothing to lose, plenty of targets, and all the close air support aircraft we could use from Operation Niagara. So I stood by and watched as he ran the first few missions flawlessly. I was impressed not only by his technical knowledge, but also by his demeanor as a corporal giving instructions to officers in the aircraft through the rank of lieutenant colonel. He was assertive and unfailingly professional. End quote. Thus, Corporal Arata, the radio operator of the previous FAC, took over. By the time Battalion came up with a replacement, Arata had proved himself so efficient and proficient as a FAC that Captain Dabney declined the replacement. Dabney labeled him the mightiest corporal in the world. He wasn't alone in his work. He had a supporter that made him helped make the team invisible. This twosome took over day one and did his job for the duration of the battle, invincibly. Lance Corporal on the left, Molaniua Toa, was Arata's spotter. Because the gunny couldn't pronounce his first or last names, Niuatoa needed a nickname. He became Chunk. He was an American Samoan chosen for this duty because he'd fired a score of 241 out of a perfect 250 with the M16 rifle at boot camp. His vision was a thing of legends. He had the patience of Job, who was absolutely unflappable. Use those eyes in these stolen Navy ships' binoculars to find Corporal Arata's targets. Company Gunny traded something special away for these binocs. When asked where he got them, he said, "Let's just say they were obtained outside the normal supply chain." That's Captain Dabney on the left, checking in with his FAC and spotter as they're looking for targets. On one occasion of watching, whenever the weather was clear enough, spotter Niu Atoa spotted muzzle flashes of an NVA 130mm gun way out in Laos. He knew what they were because when shot, the shells would soar directly over the heads of the men on 881 on their way to impact the Khe Sanh combat base. Chunk's eyesight was so acute, he could actually see the projectile and identify the weapon it was shot from by its shape and size. Amazing. Corporal Arata called for an air fac. He then put Chunk on the phone net with the air fac to begin an airstrike. Close air support jets arrived and Chunk directed them to the targets from 15 kilometers or 9 miles away with the binoculars and his eagle eyes. Over the next hours and multiple close air support jet attacks, the air fac reported the destruction of 4 large artillery guns. Lance Corporal Niu Atoa earned a Bronze Star for his work that day. Retired many years later as Wing Sergeant Major of the 3rd Marine Airway. What a Marine. Arata and his spotter recorded enemy activity daily by grid coordinates, and on any day that the weather was clear, Corporal Arata would register his mortars on the known or suspected targets with white phosphorus, Willie Pete shells. Before long, DASK would pass on a flight to him. Arata would determine the service branch and type of ordnance the flight carried, fire the appropriate marking mortar, and run the airstrike. Many times they would get 2 to 3 flights of strike aircraft, so he would stack them overhead in order of their remaining fuel. He did this all day, every day, the weather permitted. He controlled over 300 close air support strikes from the hill during the siege, including resupply of the hills by helicopters and coordination with helicopter support teams, HST, and all medical evacuations, medevacs, in an unusually clear, organized mind. In another picture of the 2 wizards charting their shots on targets, real or suspected, on a gridded chart. After a while, they picked up some tendencies and trends of the NVA in their movement, of their cannon, large mortars, and rocket launchers. This way, the corporals could sometimes get lucky and either hit them on the move or soon after the guns were in place. This is one of the 3 881 South's 81mm mortar teams. As well as attacking the enemy, these men would prepare and fire the marking rounds at enemy targets to commence an airstrike under Corporal Arata's control. In the next series of slides, I can walk you through a typical airstrike, attacking enemy positions, firing at the hill and the combat base. Corporal Arata calibrates his call for the 81mm to fire its marking round, which will be called for on coordinates decided by ground fact himself. Tricky work. Few ground facts ever tried this. Corporal Arata did it several times a day, sometimes while thinking out patterns, approaches, departures, timing, and possibly marking again for a second close air support flight, stacked overhead. His new moniker officially became India 14, or Company Close Air Support Representative. Not bad juggling with only 2 days of training. On Arota's call, this is the mortar team's marking round, which took about 20 seconds to hit the target. Then a couple more seconds, the attack aircraft appears, comes wings level at approximately 6,000 to 10,000 feet, ready to begin their runs on this mark. Corporal Arata studying the proximity of the marking round to see if he might have to readjust the attack aircraft as they await their descents on the target. Once satisfied, the pilot understands corrections on the marking round he must make. Path of the attack the ordnance to be used, and the direction of egress from the area. Arota gives the command. You're cleared in hot, and the attack begins. This is a U.S. Marine F-8 fighter aircraft used to defend Khe Sanh in the hills. It's not an attack aircraft meant for this kind of mission, but it didn't matter. It's all hands on deck to save Khe Sanh in the hills. He's very low in dropping two 250-pound snake eye bombs. This type of bomb is very accurate as its fins open and slide backward and act as deployable air brakes, almost stopping the bomb in mid-air directly over the target. Boom! The other reason to use this type of drag bomb is that it enables the pilot to get extremely low, fast, and not have to fear the bomb's upward explosion might blow the bottom out of his airplane. Also, a conventional bomb might skip up into or slide forward of the aircraft and explode as the pilot's flying directly over it. This would not make for a good day. The bombs hit, and Corporal Arota advises the pilot of the hits in relation to the actual impact location to the target. The pilot says he still has some napalm on board and is cleared in hot again to drop a napalm canister on the target. This is his napalm pass. The pilot leaves another gift for the NVA in the form of napalm. If the napalm is on target, it's not going to go well for the enemy. Only one more foothill to clear before mission complete. We call them fast movers. I'm not sure they like the term, but we could both agree. Those speeds, they sure were. How low can you go? Wow. Skill and guts. That's what these pilots were all about. He barely cleared the top. Gets the job done. Pretty close and outstanding flying to be flying that near the ground at about 275 to 350 knots. By the way, that's why I wasn't picked to be a jet pilot. Things happen too fast for my liking. Corporal Arata expresses his thanks from all of Hill 81 South, tells the pilot to visit his neighborhood anytime. He did this so often that many times Arata recognized pilots' voices and squadron call signs from previous encounters. After wreaking havoc on the enemy, this pilot is heading home to Chu Lai. These fighter pilots love close air support, as they never really had any bigs to shoot down in the south. Although they're never recently trained in close air support, they certainly had been trained stateside as students, and were only too willing to give it a try. Corporal Arata thought they excelled. Actually, this picture is taken from Hill 861. It's looking at 881 being pummeled by North Vietnamese cannon, rockets, and mortars. Remember, 881 South was closest to the border of the guns. This level of incoming was usually followed by a close air support strike by the world's greatest corporal, Arata. There must have been a helicopter landing in one of the 881 South LZs. Every time we attempted to resupply our medevac, we were afflicted with this level of fire. The enemy attempted to put a stranglehold on the hill, Marines' ability to continue to fight. This held true for all of the hills, but especially 881 South. There were no bunny holes for Corporal Arata and Dio Atua. They slept in the high rent district, the command bunker. These two were the only celebrities on Hill 881 South. They were the hill's best chance of keeping the enemy at bay, saving the hill, and the rest of the Marines knew it. When everyone else during the day were in their bunkers, these two were out in the open, laying on this and other platforms they erected, directing airstrikes and artillery fire. Any and all scrap was happily contributed to reinforce their bunker. These two got some rest at night when everyone else was on the firing line. Here is Corporal Bob Arota in the command bunker. While serving on phone watch, he's probably evaluating and reflecting on his day's work, maybe even analyzing tomorrow's challenges. He appears to be dog-tied by the pressures and responsibility of his job. He was only charged, and merely charged, with saving the whole hill. The mightiest corporal in the world indeed. Prior to the siege, these two C-846 helicopters are facing each other, shut down, waiting to be offloaded. Note the flag. More about the flag later. Enter the helicopters. I shouldn't say enter because birds were servicing the hills prior to the major attack. Choppers were the hills' only means of supply and medevac. Helicopter was their only thread to the outside world. The officers and men were completely on their own up there. Prior to January 21st, helicopter supply and resupply of Hill 881 South was by daisy chain, that is, single sequential helicopters with internal loads. Air Force and Marine C-130s, 123s, C-7s began the process by landing at the Khe Sanh base, fully loaded with supplies for the base in the hills. Loads were then broken down and staged at the Khe Sanh base, loaded internally aboard the birds, and flown up to the hills. Took a lot of Marines, both at the combat base and on the hill, to load and offload, so the loading and landing zones were crowded. It was also very time-consuming. At this time, enemy incoming was mostly sporadic. Pilots and crew always shut down and had a cup of coffee or a Coke with the troops while being offloaded. It's a casual attitude, even though major attacks were anticipated. Everything was done right out in the open. Not a wise strategy. Here's a classic example of what the early routine looked like at all of the hills in helicopter resupply and medevac. This 881 South Grunt in his clean new utilities, absent a steel helmet and flak vest, posing in front of an H-34. The Marine that took this picture even said seriously, and I quote, "The crew of this bird is probably having afternoon tea with Captain Dabney," end quote. Everything would soon evolve into a very different situation. Why was my squadron, the Purple Foxes, HMM 364, called on to get involved in resupplying Hill 881 South, about 140 miles away, with other squadrons located within 30 miles? It had to do with 881S having the most troops of the hills, needing the most attention. It also had to do with the engines in this helicopter. This is a D model. The engine's upgrade was the biggest improvement on the previous A model. The A could lift approximately 15 combat-ready Marines, or 4,000 pounds, and the D approximately 24 Marines, or 6,500 pounds. Both of these numbers are computed at sea level. At the time of the Battle of Khe Sanh, our squadron was the only one in Vietnam with all brand new D models. It was felt that the bigger the loads, the fewer the trips into the LZs on the hills, the better. So we got the call. Best efficiency. Prior to this mission, we were heavily involved in the vicious Battle of Hue City, only 9 miles away from Phu Bai, our home. That's another story for another time. Other A-model squadrons were numerous and as close as we were to Hue. So they took care of the Marines there. Hue was at sea level, where the A-models were at their lifting best. Their payloads would be drastically diminished at 3,000 feet of altitude. Helicopter load capacity is dependent on weight, altitude, temperature, humidity, and available power. Efficiency, a unique strategy, and more. Thought I should show you I was actually there, barely. I'd only been flying in country a month and a half, still a co-pilot, but got lots of stick time flying to and from any of the events. The aircraft commander flew the bird on the approaches to the hills and most IFR. I was glad to be the backup. I learned lessons and techniques flying this long mission to the hills, kept me alive for the next 11 months. When we flew into the soup, and only then did it become clear to me why we flew so much instrument time in simulators and took advantage of any opportunity of actual instrument flight rules, IFR time, stateside. Also why the aircraft had 2 pilots. My job as co-pilot at instrument weather was to handle the crew, radios, and the general oversight of the aircraft. I monitored the other instruments while backing him up on the flight controls until he, first pilot, said, "You got it." Then the roles changed instantly. There was trust by either pilot when vertigo overwhelmed the pilot flying. Marines had few available aircraft to service the needs of the infantry, Marines, or the grunts throughout the war. Wing most certainly did not want to lose any running into each other or mountains or the ground by inadequate instrument training. We trained to fly a lot of it. This short footnote is from an edited article titled "Reds Fail Twice to Stop Chopper." This is from Stars and Stripes newspaper. And I quote, "Routine maintenance job at Khe Sanh turned into a hair-raising experience for several members of the HMM 364 maintenance shop. While on a resupply mission to Hill 881 South, one of my squadron's choppers had taken a 51 caliber round through the main structure, damaging the bird's rear transmission and causing a loss of almost all the transmission fluid. The pilot managed to land safely at the Khe Sanh airstrip. Major James Parson, also known as Pudge, 3 other salvage experts plus gunners and crew chief, flew to Khe Sanh to prepare to strip the aircraft to be airlifted back to Phu Bai. After a check, they felt if the 2 holes in the trans could be patched, it might be possible to fly the bird home. The only problem was how to patch the holes, each about a 2-inch long and an inch wide. Someone suggested we make wooden plugs and hammer them into the holes. Parsons said, I quote, "So we decided to give it a try. The plugs in, the crew chief climbed up on top to pour in oil. About that time, an NVA mortarman decided to drop a few rounds in on us to make the job more interesting," said the co-pilot, who was quickly opening the 26-quart cans and handing them to the crew chief. It took the crew chief about 35 minutes to complete the job, get the chopper back in the air, end quote. Now quoting Pudge, the pilot, "Funny how fast a person can move when being shot at. During the flight back to Phu Bai, all of the crewmen stood in the rear loading ramp with a hammer, tapping the plugs back in each time one would vibrate loose," end quote. I just happened to have this image of a crew chief topping up a rear transmission with a quart or 2 of transmission fluid, much like was done to Yankee Kilo 17 with 26 quarts. I'm sure 26 quarts would seem like a lifetime, with Charlie, as we called him, the enemy, shooting at you. Another thing happened on the first day of battle. That would be the 21st of January. An old H-34 came to 881 South with an ammunition resupply and to pick up some wounded. The aircraft landed and began to be offloaded so the wounded could be put on to the H-34. This needed to be a quick exchange. Once the siege began, having men in the open for any amount of time was unconscionable. Suddenly, a 122-millimeter mortar round impacted within a few feet of the chopper. The senior corpsman and 2 of the previous wounded were killed. About a dozen others, including the H-34 crew, were wounded, all seriously. H-34 was damaged and the fire directed at the hill was so constant and intense, the old helicopter remained there throughout the siege. Ultimately, there were 6 more birds crashed and abandoned on or near 881. Note the door on this old chopper is missing. I wonder where it went. This short footnote is about the eyes on the funny-looking helicopter crashed on Hill 881 South. The helicopter squadron with this logo was Medium Marine Helicopter Squadron 163, or HMM 163. The eyes were originally painted out of a love of the 60s television show I Dream of Jeannie. The eyes were called Jeannie eyes by the squadron's mates. The grunts, infantry Marines, would have no part of that nickname. It took to calling them Evil Eyes. The squadron picked up on this and liked it too. For now they kept their original Ridge Runner call sign, Love the Eyes. Naturally, the Ridge Runner's logo on patch was doomed. Sometime during 1966, the 1st Marine Air Wing command staff, our brain trust senior officers, came to the conclusion that henceforth no helicopters would have any more white or any other colors painted on them. Did they have anything else to do fighting a war? By the way, our Purple Fox logo was in a prominent white circle. It's felt that it gave the enemy an aiming point to shoot at. Thus all helicopters would revert to the flat marine green with flat black logos and aircraft numbering, call signs, etc. Really? At that time, it just so happened that HMM 163 was sent to a small helicopter aircraft carrier just 3 miles off the coast in order to support a quick-action Marine battalion aboard. The squadron commander of HMM 163, Lieutenant Colonel Rocco Bianchi, reasoned that seeing as how his birds were not technically parked overnight in country, he would not paint out the eyes. Lieutenant Colonel Bianchi just happened to be old friends with the wing commander. This did not keep Major General Robertshaw from reading Bianchi the riot act concerning the unauthorized paint scheme and told him to change it as soon as possible. Also in the room at this time was the commanding general, outranking two-star General Robert Shaw, of all Marine ground forces, 3rd Marine Division in the area, who politely interrupted the discussion by saying, "It sure is good to have the Evil Eyes back here at Fubai." The 1st Marine, commanding General Robert Shaw, quietly relented, and the evil eyes on this squadron's aircraft have remained until this day. Shown here now is VMM 163, Evil Eyes and all. By the way, this is an MV-22 Osprey transport tilt rotor belonging to VMM 163 of 2018 vintage. This is the end of part 3. Consider this halfway. There's many more great stories to follow. I'm sure you'll be entertained. Hang in there. Back from the short footnotes about VMM 163 and its evil eyes. It's time to get back to the story. This is a well-protected bunny hole. The men slept a lot during the day as they were awake most of the night fighting the NVA at their barbed wire perimeter, sometimes even hand-to-hand. As mentioned above, the enemy attempted nightly to overrun their position. The metal over their heads were here, covered by a piece of plywood, looked suspiciously like corrugated steel covered by a thin sheet of aircraft aluminum. Looks exactly like the passenger door of an H-34. Men cannibalized any aircraft down in their zones for metal to be used in fortifying their bunkers. First, though, they appropriated the Bird's 2 M60 machine guns. This artist's rendition is what every night looked like to the men on 881 South. The enemy broaching the wire perimeter attempting to overrun the Marines. Marines' greatest fear? Being overrun. By this time, it became obvious that internal loading wasn't going to work at the hills or the base. It took too long and too many men had to be out in the open in the zones for too long. Starting the 22nd of January, all loads to the hill were external and in slings, but still staged at Khe Sanh base for the aircraft to pick up. As incoming got more frequent, more accurate, down at the Khe Sanh base, Marines staging loads, helos picking up loads, were at risk, and loads themselves were often damaged and deemed useless while in the staging area. Men at the combat base were dying loading helicopters. How ridiculous. Something needed to be done. I'm making a slight departure from the subject we were discussing. This is basically the same discussion. The discussion of Marines landing and taking off from Hill 881. This has to concern what the Marines needed more than almost anything. It was a top priority. It was water. Maybe next to ammo and medevac, it was the most important mission, an item on their wish list. It even rated ahead of letters from home. Here we see plastic pallet wrapping attempting to gather rain, of which there was a lot, so that the choppers wouldn't have to make a special trip to bring water. The heat was oppressive and humid, even during the colder monsoon season. It was also wetter, however. Southeast Asia is more humid and dehydrating than the Southeast USA. It took lots of energy and water by the Marines to hold possession of the hill. Captain Dabney had the men out not shaving and encouraged sleeping in the daytime to conserve water and to not have us purple foxes make a special trip to bring water. This photo was taken by David Powell. I have something to say about him and his photography later. This slide shows a very hot, humid day on 881 South. Most everyone is out of sight, saving water. It took a full external load at one aircraft, tying up at least one bird during the gaggle, as we'll get to later, the Super Gaggle, just to get 881 South enough water to drink, cook, and clean wounds. If we missed resupply for 2 days due to weather, that meant that at least 3 of 10 Super Gaggle birds would be dedicated exclusively to water. Captain Dabney refused to waste it with shaving and wash-up. He decided to use no more water than was necessary because our choppers were bringing enough essentials and risking our butts on every trip and to have a special water flight. He actually rationed water and food. The men all started to look like North Sea Vikings, like I mentioned the lieutenant. I mentioned that to you before. Of course, they did. Gave Dabney some heat about it, but he looked out for his men, didn't want a decrease in chow and ammo shipments. Plus, our men and aircraft, putting their lives in peril over water, he and his men might have used more wisely. A great leader of men and protector of his grunts on the hill, as well as us in HMM 364. As you have seen, water became an acute problem for the warriors on 881 South throughout their tour. Water was initially set up in 5-gallon jerry cans. They were big, tipsy, and didn't have very good tops. So even if shrapnel didn't hold them out, they might turn over and break and leak. Sometimes a load would be dropped hard from a chopper. The cans would burst open. There was never enough water on the hills, or actually anywhere in Vietnam for that matter. One day, a CH-53 brought up a full 250-gallon water buffalo to the hill. About 10 minutes later, a 120-millimeter rocket shell landed near it. The men on 881 South crouched in a trench watching all that precious water run out onto the ground. Failed experiment. Finally, someone down at Dong Ha came up with the idea of using 155-millimeter cannon powder canisters for water. They'd line them with plastic bags, fill it with water, and screw the top down tight. The canister was strong, had a heavy-duty top, and it didn't matter if they fell over when dropped in an external load. Also, they just only held a couple gallons of water, so the sling load would bring lots of them. If an enemy round would hit nearby, they'd lose a few, but most would still be full when the men went out after dark to clear zones. Too dangerous to clear them in the daytime. Note the tape measure showing size and the tight twist tops. One day, Captain Dabney said, "The weather was minimal for helo operations with low-lying scud clouds and a 20-knot wind. The enemy active as always," he continued. We had been humping cases of 105-millimeter howitzer ammo up the hill after a CH-46 hit by anti-aircraft fire while inbound and dropped an external load outside our perimeter wire down the slope. An enemy forward observer spotted the working party. We knew we were seen. Troops dropped their ammo and began scurrying up the hill. They didn't make it. 10 to 15 rounds of 120-millimeter mortar impacted around them. They hit the deck, but there was no cover from the slope. The barrage was over. We had 14 casualties, including 1 dead, 7 emergency, mostly traumatic limb amputations or gut wounds, and 6 priority medevacs. By now, the clouds had shifted, and our 5 LZs would all be visible to the enemy, thus unusable for medevac birds. Forward observer and the fire came from the south, so we moved to the north slope to stage the casualties for the medevac bird we requested. By the time the moves were complete, the bird checked in a swift medevac, and we knew we had another Purple Fox crew on final. First of all, this is not one of our aircraft. I'm merely showing what we called a ramp hover. The Army called it a pinnacle maneuver in their CH-47. Of course they did. It illustrates what Captain Dabney was talking about here. Anyway, Dabney continued. We got him down to about 100 yards from where the casualties were staged, had him sit there for 10 or 15 seconds until a Marine reported the tube pop of the mortars. Then we moved the bird down the face of the slope and over to where he could back his ramp up beside the wounded on the steep hill, where the forward observer couldn't see. A few 120s landed in the zone he just left, no worries. The stretcher bearers began loading the ramp in order of seriousness. Tough work, as we could use only 2 stretcher bearers to keep the numbers down in the zone. Because of the very steep slope, we had to approach the ramp from the side to avoid the rotor blades, which barely cleared the hill behind the ramp. To complicate all this, the helo kept dancing around, bucking the strong, turbulent winds, sweeping up the slope. I was standing down the slope with my HST, or Helicopter Support Team radio operator, at my side. His radio tuned to the pilot's frequency. We were on the right side, almost under the nose of the bird. We could see both the pilots and loading operation at the ramp. We got 3 casualties aboard when some anti-aircraft fire, probably twin 50 calibers, cut loose. I saw the rounds kicking up dirt behind the bird above the rotor blades. Our tactical car sign was India. Fox's was Swift. I recall these radio transmissions. Swift, India. You're taking rounds above your rotor blades. India. Swift, roger. Pilot maintained his hover, holding his ramp against the hill. 5 wounded aboard now, then another burst from the NVA 51s. Swift, India. Hits in your right engine. India Swift, roger. Pilot continued holding his hover as the engine started smoking. Another burst of fire. This hit the deck beside the ramp and hitting a stretcher bearer in the leg. Crew chief jumped off the ramp and pushed the stretcher in and dragged the wounded bearer aboard. 1 more emergency wounded to go. We got him aboard, and my HST man waved the bird away. 2 of the priorities had been stretcher bearers and had remained on board. The remaining 4 and 1 expired medevac would wait for the next helo to arrive at the helicopter. Just as the chopper began to move away from the hillside, a couple rounds from the 51s went through the plexiglass above the pilot's head. I didn't call him, figuring he knew about that. The bird limped away down toward Khe Sanh. Black smoke trailing from the right engine. Swift, India. Thanks. India, Swift. Welcome. Anytime. He meant it too. Damnedest feat of pure guts, superb airmanship I've ever seen. And so it went for nearly 100 days. A couple of days later, I sent down a recommendation for the pilot to receive a Silver Star. Never heard back. Don't know if he got it or if the recommendation ever got to the squadron with all the chaos going on. And had the tail number, too busy to get it. Date and time should have been enough. End quote. Our pilot never received that recommendation. Incoming exploding all around them. This bird is pulling into a hover to pick up external sling load at the Khe Sanh base to fly to one of the hills. Marines on the ground were always in danger because any time an aircraft showed up, on or above the runway, incoming followed. Helicopter support teams, or HSTs, even took to calling us incoming maggots or magnet asses. Casualties continued to mount. This slide I've entitled The Enemy and Its 122mm Mortar. Things did not improve on Hill 881 South for either the air crews or the 881 South Marines. By now, the NVA tended to leave their mortar tubes registered wherever they'd fired their last round in an LZ. So the grunts would fake that zone with air panels and smoke. 881, don't forget, had 5 landing zones. Bring the bird to a hover over one and listen for the tube. Pop from a 122mm mortar is loud. As soon as the Marines heard it, they would move to another LZ and bring the helo in, usually getting away with it because it took the NVA about 10 seconds to shift the tube to the new target, and time of flight was about 20 to 25 seconds. Right in front of me as a co-pilot was a stopwatch on the dash. The second we were given the sign to switch LZ, I'd start the watch, begin calling off seconds to the pilots. This gave 30 seconds to get the casualties aboard, replacements offloaded, bird gone, troops back under cover before the next round came in at the new zone. This slide illustrates pop smoke, hover over the zone, listen for the pop of the motor tube, move to another LZ, better known as pop hover, pop move. Unfortunately, this tactic only worked for one helicopter, and 881 South always needed several, Shifting zones after every bird was not an option, as it meant that the helicopter support team and others had to move into the open under fire was not a good plan. Also, LZ shifting might mitigate the effect of NVA mortars. It did nothing to stop anti-aircraft fire, which is both constant and came from both sides of the hill in hopes of bringing down a bird. This is another view from a different angle of the sliding LZ attempt to resupply. Note the HST signaling the helo out in the open. I don't know who took this picture. It's the most beautiful one in this whole presentation. Religious implications are obvious. Jesus as an HST member is overwhelming. I can tell you one thing, this man is fearless, standing out there directing in a chopper. Some kind of heroic, otherworldly image. Another problem with delivering troops in this manner and supplies in this manner was that the troops were up in trench lines firing suppressive fire at all unknown or suspected anti-aircraft sites. Although these fires tended to make the anti-aircraft fire inaccurate and thus help the helicopters, 5,200 Marines were exposed during helicopter operations on the hill. Given the volume and accuracy of the mortars, the men of 881 South inevitably took more casualties, often multiple. That meant that when they had finished the original resupply or medevac, the hill had to call for another aircraft to evacuate new casualties. This took on the characteristics of a domino effect and quickly became an exercise in futility. It was actually pretty simple. The more accurate the NVA got, the more casualties the Marines got. Captain Dabney took the problem with helicopters coming to his hill up to the battalion level. We got the old do the best you can answer. Hill 881 South began to fill up with shot-down helicopters. Many surviving aircrew members spent the night with the men of 881 until picked up. Heard lots of bitching from the hill Marines. After spending a night on the hill, the flyers understood as they too had little protection from the enemy fire in their choppers. In the first 4 weeks of battle, 7 helos were shot down at Hill 881 South, along with a lot of wounded in action aircrewmen. The 881 Marines lost 100 plus Marines, killed or wounded getting choppers on and off that hill during this time period. This chopper is crashing just short of the LZ platform, note the red arrow, and one of the hills after losing an engine to enemy small arms fire. The aircraft had a heavy external load, and though the crew chief pickled the load or released it, the pilot didn't have enough power to wave off his approach. No fatalities, just a bunch of beat-up crew members. Red dust was kicked up by the rotor blades, self-destructing, hitting the ground. The enemy probably enjoyed the stuff released his way. Our aviators and crew had to spend the night with the grunts of Hill 861 and gained a new appreciation of their situation on the hills. An instant bond developed between the two. Not only were the hill troops tired of the enemy shooting just at them, but also afraid every time a helicopter was inbound at their hill. They knew the shooting would start up again the minute the chopper came into view, putting them in additional peril. We were aware they loved us for the aid we brought them, hated us for the grief that followed us to their hill. As usually, the 250 caliber machine guns on board were naturally requisitioned by the grunts. This is a picture of a CH-46 shot up and crashing in a landing zone. One squadron lost 6 aircraft and 20 crewmen and aviators, resupplying the hills in February alone. I'll talk specifically about that squadron in a couple of slides. Overall, Marines lost 196 CH-46s in the Vietnam War. This is one of them shot down carrying a load to 881 South. All on board perished. This is one of ours, Yankee Kilo 16, also known as Patches. Majority of the hits are aimed at the window gunner. It's called Patches because it had so many hits throughout its tour. The metal benders, or sheet metal Marines, ran out of official factory repair strips. and to resort to covering the holes with flattened beer cans. Aluminum is aluminum in it. This particular time it got shot up approaching, setting down in the LZ and then lifting off to exit 881. After the patching and repairs were completed, it was back flying missions. This was Window Gunner Sam Hampton's lucky day. North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong always unloaded their weapons on our .250 caliber window gunners. Flying in helicopters in Vietnam and taking rounds inside the cabin was like baseball. Merely a game of inches. This is what the floor next to the window gunner, but chopper looked like after a trip into a hot LZ. We believed in shooting back. Our gunners always carried extra ammo when we went anywhere near Khe Sanh in the hills. On most trips, they shot at the enemy on the way in, during, and on the way out. Don't know if we ever hit anyone, but the shooting seems to keep the heads of the enemy down. Both sides never quit shooting at each other. It's just another quick footnote to talk about these U.S. Marine aircrew wings. These are the only aircrew wings in the United States military that need to be earned in combat. A person needs 20 combat mission points to get the wings, but can't wear them. They can possess but not wear. The wings can't be worn until all 3 stars are mounted at the top of the wings. Like the wings, a star represents engagement of an enemy aircraft vessel or fortified position. In other words, if you get fired on while a flight crewman, you received a mission point. 20 points for the wings, 10 points for each star. When all 3 stars are earned and mounted on the wings, only then can the completed wings be worn. The wings have become a part of the crewman's uniform and record. Having the wings are a great asset in promotion. These wings are important enough to the Marine Corps for the recipient to be awarded in front of the entire squadron by the commanding officer. They're also a great source of pride for the wearer. On occasion, the completed wings are bestowed by the Marine Corps upon a crewman, crew, or unit of another branch of the U.S. military who has fought heroically in a combat aviation scenario. This honor does not occur often. Thank you for your patience with me in these footnotes. This footnote is over in time to return to the story. Send me a gunner that's firing a B-40 rocket-propelled grenade or an RPG launcher. That was equal death to helicopters. Frequently, the flight commenced its approach when the LZ could be only seen through very small holes in the clouds and the ceiling was very low. This necessitated long, level, slow approaches exposed to close-range automatic weapons fire, sniper fire, and even rocket-propelled grenades. This gave the enemy a shooting gallery effect of us slowly passing in front of his sights. Not good. I need to apologize for this horrible slide, but it does convey the point I'm trying to make. Prior to the Super Gaggle, on clear days, flying heavy, slow over open ground. This is what I meant by shooting gallery effect. We passed right in front of the enemy guns for him to pot shot at us at will. Moving pretty slow, too. Somehow someone needed to suppress the enemy's guns while we were low, slow, and heavy. Likewise, let me apologize again for this damaged image, which illustrates 2 birds with only seconds of separation, slowly descending down an imaginary glide path to one of the hill's assigned LZs. This image is probably the worst one in the entire presentation. If an aircraft was somehow delayed in the landing zone a few seconds too long, it's difficult for the next bird in to simply wave off, climb out, and return for another pass. If he was already committed and in his descent, it's difficult to stop the rate of descent, max gross weight. Thankfully, it didn't happen often. The commanding officers of other Marine helicopter squadrons were not deaf to Captain Dabney's need. Tired of losing aircraft and crew as well. They saw the futility of continuing the same tactics. Something new and innovative had to be done. New and innovative are not terms usually compatible with Marine Corps doctrine. From this shared frustration came an idea from an extremely credible and experienced helicopter pilot. for Medium Marine Helicopter Squadron 262, or HMF 262. Major David Althoff, one of the most decorated Marines of the Vietnam War. To say his voice would lend some credibility to senior officers was obvious. Still, someone of superior rank would hopefully listen. For his flying prowess and courage, was the recipient of 3 Silver Stars, 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 1 Bronze Star, 55 Flight Strike Air Medals, 1,080 combat missions, over 3,300 hours of flight time, and was later selected for the Alfred E. Cunningham Marine Corps Aviator of the Year in 1968. He was on his second 13-month tour in Vietnam. That's Althoff standing, and Lieutenant Colonel Steinberg sitting in the beige flight suit. Together with his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Mel Steinberg, Althoff concocted a plan to counter the wounding and loss of life, as well as the helicopters in servicing the hills in Khe Sanh. First, it had to be a well-thought-out, rock-solid plan to be sold to the generals at Wing in Da Nang, approximately 160 miles away. 2 men flew down, stated their case, most importantly explaining the mounting cost of lives lost, and finally how soon the squadrons would run out of flyable helicopters. Losing lives, money, and equipment was always a powerful argument when dealing with generals. This is the squadron that lost the 6 aircraft and 20 crewmen in February. The 2 men made their case, the generals agreed, and the 2 pilots returned to their squadron with a promise the plan would move forward with great speed. Initially, its name was Operation Sierra, but was perverted to the Super Gaggle, as in a gaggle of geese. You'll see why it was well named. Of course, the generals at Wing are probably still arguing about whose idea it was for the operation and the name. I kid you not. The battle of words would still be going if all involved were not dead by now. New tactics were to be implemented on February 24th, 1968. But what were the details of the new tactics? This is the end of part 4. If you're not completely turned off by my raspy, rough voice, please stick with me. The best is yet to come. The first change to be made to accommodate the Super Gaggle was to move the staging of our external loads from the Khe Sanh runway to Dong Ha, a secure Marine air base was there. It's only 38 miles to the hills with a minimum of the enemy surrounding the Dong Ha base. Every morning we flew to Dong Ha anyway to refuel after our flight from Phu Bai, about 70 miles away. South, 52 miles as the crow flies. This picture shows 7 of 10 Purple Foxes landing to get refueled at a briefing of which hill we'd be going to that day, what to expect when we got there. We pretty much knew which hill we were going to go to. We certainly knew what to expect when we got there. We were also told in what order each aircraft would start their approach, which of the 5 landing zones on 881 South each would use to release their load onto. It's a very time-sensitive operation. Everyone had to perform as if a musician in a concert. I've entitled this slide A Typical Day. I've included this map to describe a typical day in flying to the hills surrounding the Khe Sanh combat base. We'd get airborne from Phu Bai and head east, directly to the coast, end up 2 to 3 miles out to sea, then turn left and fly north to parallel Dong Ha. Once we were parallel, we'd turn left again, descend to about 10 feet and head west to the base at low level. Over open country or farmland, rice paddies, it's always better to fly low, turning and jinking. That way the enemy never had time to set up for a shot as you sped past. It seemed to work. We took a slightly different route every day and never took a hit, doing this for the whole operation. This Fox is hooked up and ready for liftoff from Dong Ha. The loads were not set up for being able to pull into a hover and then release them. Loads were set up and designed to be at max weight for the altitude, humidity, and wind direction, and temperature. They were set to fly as if on a glide path, slowly descending to the LZ just before almost crashing into the landing zone. The crew chief would release the load as it barely touched the ground. By the way, there was a rule, no dropping the sling load. Crew chief would then yell over the intercom the pilot to pull max power, dump the nose, attempt to quickly transitional lift, and climb the hell out of there. Finally, some quick maneuverability returned. Liftoff. This bird is heading to the rendezvous point where all 10 birds would get into a loose gaggle formation and begin our approaches to the hills. The bold plan required complex planning involving large numbers of aircraft, many times under instrument conditions, in a small area. Only perfection in flying would be acceptable in its execution. Thank God for our very experienced second tour senior pilots. Again, I've shown you slides of optimal flying weather. Many of the missions were under IFR or instrument flying rules. Many days we flew outboard on an obstacle-free, one not running us into the mountains, that is, radial, of the Dong Ha TACAN, Tactical Air Navigation System, toward Khe Sanh with our aircraft to rendezvous all 10 over the base. This is a C-130 stuck on the flight line at Khe Sanh. The minute the weather cleared to flight minimums, the aircraft needed to be turned up, taken off immediately. The NVA began shooting when the runway became visible. Pilots stayed on their planes, mostly during the weather delay. Most of the images on this presentation were taken on clear days. Assume that there was a good prevalent weather would be a huge mistake. Weather both at the base and on the hills at this time of year, many days, looked like this. Sometimes a heavy fog, rain, or cloud cover would go on for days at a time. Troops needed water, food, ammo, and most importantly, medevacs almost daily. The imaginative Super Gaggle plan had one serious drawback: the heavy monsoon weather prevented VFR or visual flight rules through the high hazardous terrain between Dong Ha and the hills and Khe Sanh. Another detrimental factor was the Khe Sanh TACAN and ground control approach radar, or the GCA. These facilities were inoperative a lot of the time due to contact of enemy bombardment. It was a mess. The navigational gear went down. The men on the hills didn't eat or drink that day. I'm going to repeat the map that I had further back in about 180 slides ago in the presentation. Give you about 25 seconds now to pour over what you recognize better now than you did before. During the resupply medevac and Super Gaggle, HMN 364 flew 422 hours of actual instrument time, or IFR, 246 radar departures and approaches, all with max weight external sling loads. When we had to descend, climb, or change headings, it was rough. When the load would shift and swing, the aircraft would roll 15 degrees from one side to the other, while the nose would pitch up and down 10 to 20 degrees. It's a constant fight combating vertigo, spatial disorientation, induced by the gyrations of the helicopter in response to the land hanging load. Recovery from these conditions under IFR conditions is made even more difficult by the basic instability of the helicopter itself. Have I mentioned that what IFR is? It means being able to fly with no horizon, no vision outside the aircraft, on instruments only. It's to fly blind except for the instruments. That was the beauty of having two pilots in the cockpit, both scanning the instruments to keep flying straight and level and maintaining a safe attitude. The operative voice command when the attitude of the aircraft looked strange and dangerous to the pilot not flying the aircraft was, "I got it." If the pilot flying the aircraft felt that he was losing control and getting some vertigo, he would say, "You got it." We flew 45 days straight in IFR weather with a lot of "I gots it." Passing controls back and forth numerous times during our mission to avoid vertigo was not unusual. Some days we had to climb to 8,000 to 10,000 feet to get on top, and then try to find a small hole in the overcast and fly our aircraft to the top of the hill and the LZ. This picture is what's called and known as on top, looking for a hole. I've entitled this slide The Ever-Present Swinging Load. The Super Gaggle flight was able to reach a VFR on top of the clouds, or find a break in the overcast to allow a spiral down through the cloud cover near the combat base. The birds would do a 180-degree climbing turn to a pre-briefed altitude, return to Dong Ha for an instrument approach. Instrument approaches utilized were the TACAN's minimums of 600 feet ceiling, 1/2 mile visibility, with the GCA minimums that had helicopters with a 200-foot ceiling and a 1/4 mile visibility. Some days, because of monsoon or hurricane weather, we just couldn't get in to resupply our medevac. We tried, but if you couldn't see anything, you waved it off. If we missed more than one day, it really hurt the 881 South Marines. In 2 days, they were low on ammo, out of water, food, and some badly wounded men died. Sadly, when we were able to get back in, there were more filled body bags to take with us. As I said before, one good thing about flying IFR in marginal weather, it made it more difficult for the NVA to get a good bead on us when shooting. They couldn't see us in the clouds. Can you imagine trying to control the aircraft with a 4,000 to 6,000 pound load swinging like this? This is the crew chief's view of the load beneath the aircraft. Don't ask me why, but this square hole in the floor was called the hell hole. It sat amidships longitudinally. This way the counter-rotating rotor blades would balance each other out, and there would be no effect on the rudders. We had no rudders. No need for a tail rotor. If anything got tangled or looked like it might cause damage to the bird, the crew chief would cut the load loose electronically, return to Dong Ha for another. The load was observed by someone all the way to the landing zone. This is what the air taxi up the side of the hill trick might look like. Clouds at the base of the hill. Sometimes we needed to get into an LZ even when the top was covered with clouds. On several occasions, approaches were made and the mission completed when the zones were IFR. We devised a tactic of flying very low up the valley, slightly under the cloud base, entering the clouds at the base of the hill, and air taxiing up the side of the hill while looking straight down through the plexiglass nose on the floor to maintain visual reference with the ground. This type of flying was not part of the Super Gaggle tactic. It would be impossible for a group of helicopters to proceed up the mountain. The LZ with a terrible mid-air collision possibility. It's dangerous enough trying this maneuver one at a time. This Purple Fox aircraft, Yankee Kilo 5, was hit by a B-40 RPG, and although 2 men perished inside the chopper, with 2 wounded. It miraculously flew all the way back to Dong Ha and a successful landing. The aircraft was repaired and flew missions again. This gun crew is sitting on a Soviet 37mm anti-aircraft gun, a gift they gave many of these to the North Vietnamese Army. This is really what's meant by an anti-aircraft gun. The Soviet-made 37mm gun is radar-operated and shoot down a swift-flying jet below 20,000 feet. If that can do that to a jet or a transport, what do you think it can do to a low and slow helicopter? Lights out. Anyway, these were everywhere, all over the Khe Sanh Valley. What made them even more dangerous was their mobility. The enemy moved these things at night to a multitude of places across the grid. Our intelligence would chart their position one day, and the next day they'd be gone. Sometimes they moved them hourly. Usually they would relocate depending on our presumed approach routes to the hills. And by this time in the war, the anti-aircraft gun crews had had a lot of practice and were very accurate. 881 South was constantly looking for this kind of target to eliminate, to protect us. While Hill 881 South was awaiting the Purple Foxes, the Marines cleaned their M16 weapons for tonight's NVA attack on the perimeter. Unfortunately, the worst of weather conditions prevailed during most of the Khe Sanh and much of the Hill's resupply operations. Flight was challenging even without the enemy fire. When the flight rendezvoused over Khe Sanh, the resupply job was only beginning. Hilltop LZs were small and hazardous. They were registered with enemy fire, and just outside the small perimeter was infested with automatic weapons and snipers, which proved deadly to the overweight, slow-moving, vulnerable helicopters. This is a TA-4F Skyhawk. This particular model is a trainer, thus the 2 seats. It's also pack and marking rockets on the wingtips. The aviator flies the plane with the forward air controller, or FAC, in the rear, directing traffic. This is the next change in tactics for the Super Gaggle. Now it got fun, and Corporal Arana got involved. As the Gaggle checked in, en route to 881 South, the TA-4 took control of the show. He orbited at 20,000 feet over a specific hill, acting as the forward air controller. He was also known as the conductor. The FAC would control all radio communications and direct all actors in the play. FAC also passed on all flights to Arota. He coordinated with Corporal Arota to control, prep, or repair the area around 881 South prior to the initiation of the Super Gaggle. We love the prep. All elements must arrive on stage, in order, and on time. No stragglers. Next, the Hill's mortarmen would register their 3 mortars at known or suspected enemy anti-aircraft AA sites and fire for effect. All their Marines would stand by near their trench or bunker at about 10 minutes on Arota's command before the expected arrival of the Super Gaggle. These mortarmen would fire marking rounds, white phosphorus, on the same targets for the jets to see and destroy. Almost instantly, 4 more Marine A-4 jets would appear and attack the marked target positions with rockets. Whomever they didn't hit, at least they kept the enemy's head down. Right after the rocket attack, 2 more jets would float down a fine mist of tear gas. Overall, it took 12 A-4s, 1 TA-4, 2 to 3 Huey gunships, and 10 CH-46 Purple Foxes for every Super Gaggle. Sometimes in the good weather, we'd perform the ritual 2 or 3 times a day. This would be a view of 881 South just prior to beginning the Super Gaggle prep. Tear gas? Really? Why? Because the NVA would crawl up some of the trails we saw in an earlier slide, lay on their backs near the summit, and fire their weapons into the bellies of our birds as we went over them. We could vary our approaches only slightly from day to day because of the strong wind direction and the smallest of the offload zones. The enemy knew this, so a little tear gas up his nose and eyes usually provided us enough time to get through. How much time did we need? More to come on that. Depending on the available ordnance, 2 more fast movers, A-4s, would roll in, drop, delay cluster, anti-personnel, or high-drag snake-eye bombs on the targets. Or A-4s would drop napalm 75 to 100 meters from the hill's perimeter. Now the 881 South Marines got re-involved. Approximately 300 to 400 men manned their perimeter trench and heaved a grenade down the hill toward the enemy. 881 South mortars fired 4 to 5 more rounds of anti-aircraft sights, then ran for cover. The hill's gunny had trouble keeping the men under cover, so they wanted to see the show that was about to unfold, especially the newbies. All these aircraft zooming around, dropping ordnance on the enemy was quite a show. The Super Gaggle got pretty exciting, too. The last 2 A-4 jets brought in smoke to screen our approaches and to give us time in the zones away from the enemy's eyes. Smoke looks like a braided rope unraveling. It's exactly how it behaved. After the smoke, the final action begins. It's another view of the smoke opening up. 2 A-4s would drop it near the top of the hill, begin to fall downward to the bottom, and when fully unraveled and deployed, would be blown back upward again to cover our approaches in the landing zones. By now, the men have gone to their bunkers and trenches. This is a slide actually from Hill 861, showing the A4 smoke blowing up and beginning to cover up Hill 881 South's LZs near the finish of the prep for Super Gaggle. 8081 South would get the same treatment every time there was a gaggle. In good weather, maybe all day. Smoke show continues. This is a view from the top of 881 South. Note how the smoke braid continues to unravel and spread up the hill. Our gaggle usually consisted of 10 birds, 2 strings of 5, above and then in the smoke heading for the LZs. With prevailing winds, we were usually covered by some smoke until we got out. Smoke making it trickier for the second string of 5. Visibility was more restricted than the first 5 aircraft. With the hill's LZs all within 200 meters, the odds of mid-air collisions went up dramatically. This is a picture of a 500-pounder hitting the enemy. This and the following 2 slides are pictures taken from 881 South of the airstrike prep preceding the arrival of the Super Gaggle. The A4s really tore them up and, according to Corporal Arata, were very accurate. This is napalm hitting on the crest of 881 South. Plus, below, you'll see on the left yesterday's bomb craters. Here's some 250-pounders dropping to the saddle of 881 South. Also pictured are the trails often used by the NBA to attack the crest. I've entitled this slide, Smoke Drifts In, Helicopters Follow. Most of the men on 881 South now are by now in their bunkers, as the smoke begins to creep up over the mountain. Only the helicopter support team crew are out in the open near the zones to direct us into our positions. Shortly, we will begin our rapid descents into the wind from 1,500 feet above the hill. Make a 90-degree turn, or as the men on the hill called it, by the right flank march. Toward the LZs, when we were abreast of them, started our straight-in drive to our spots, 5 at a time. Here we come. Boxes leaving their perch above 881 South, waiting for the conductor, the TA-4 FAC, to give the order to form up in single file, but not in an inline formation, at a prescribed altitude, with 10 seconds between each aircraft. We each got 5 to 6 seconds in the LZ to deliver our loads and get the heck out. The whole adventure should only take 3 minutes, max. This image illustrates the by the right flank march maneuver, except it was all left turns. The chopper on the right is still flying 90 degrees to the LZ. The one in the middle is commencing his left turn, and the one on the far left is on final to his Zell. This diagram of Hill 881 South was drawn by Major General Harry Jenkins. It's a good representation of its features. There were 3 LZs in the saddle with the other 2 on the right in India Company's area. It illustrates how little room we had during the gaggle to get in and out quickly without running into each other. The red arrows show the 5 landing zones. I'll give you a little extra time to study this slide. So far, this slide shows everything going according to plan. If you look closely, you will see 3 foxes in this slide. Look on the nose of the closest bird for number 3, tiny speck. Although this picture is taken from ground level, it shows an image that the 2 aviators might have seen just before touching their load to the ground in one of the LZs, then releasing it and hightailing it out of there. The last bird in the second echelon, you can notice no sling load and empty, would actually land and leave mail, replacements, pick up medevacs, or men going on R&R. Lots of R&Rs got missed due to an overabundance of wounded needing medevac. Tail end Charlie was not in any more danger than carrying a sling, as it came in lighter and faster. It was much more maneuverable, but he did have to stay in the zone longer. Naturally, no one wanted to be the last bird in. This aircraft is retrieving medevacs from 881 South. Some are in better shape than others. This was horrible, ghastly work. The captain continued, "We had no water to clean with, so any wound would eventually get infected. It's a pay me now or pay me later situation. Better to send them down as soon as they got hit. Besides, the regulations in those days said that if you hadn't been treated by a doctor, you didn't rate a Purple Heart. I was damned if I was going to let those good Marines be cheated out of a Purple Heart just because they happened to be serving on that god-awful hill." Some Marines who were lightly wounded simply refused evacuation, figuring the medal wasn't worth the risk of the trip down and back. I even had a couple who refused evacuation for light wounds because it would have been their third Purple Heart, which meant they got sent out of the country. They didn't want to leave. Sense of duty. Wish I could convey to the young Marines today and to our fellow countrymen how magnificent those men really were. Again, I apologize for the quality of this slide, but I need to introduce David. This is Lance Corporal David Essom, a member of the Helicopter Support Team, or AHT, displaying a brightly colored fluorescent air panel. He would lay one out on the ground to gain the aviators' attention to the correct spot to set down an external load or land. While everybody else hunkered down in their bunkers or trenches, brave men like Dave were out in the open, bringing in our birds. I've entitled this slide, "Load Laid Down with HST's Help." I've mentioned the helicopter support teams before and how important they were to us. We never had a collision or a misunderstanding where and when we should be. In the 881 South LZs, they were professional. It's also important to include their commanding officer's opinion of their service. Captain Dabney wrote, "My HSTs did, as a matter of routine, what would have been in any other circumstances deserving of many heroic awards. I don't recall any medevac, resupply, or external load hookup where the zone was not hot. That came with the territory. Daily when the weather allowed, and often several times a day, those Marines stood in the open in those 5 LZs under the helicopters and performed tasks without which we, grunts, and the helo crewmen could not have survived. When birds arrived, so did incoming." End quote. With one aircraft gone, he's already directing in the next one. Captain Dabney continued, "The anti-aircraft rounds were always whipping by and the mortar rounds were often on their way. And they knew it, yet they did their duty till the bird was gone. Then they ran like hell and dove into the nearest hole. I often thought that the way they stood, with their backs to the NVA guns, as they guided in the helos, was a superb gesture of disdain. Their courage and resolve was the stuff of legend. All of us on that hill remember it. And some may not now wear some symbol of it on their chests in no way diminishes the heroism they displayed daily. Be aware that we who shared that time with them and utterly depended on them know the magnificence of their performance. They can forever look at themselves and know that in these horrible conditions, they courageously did their duty. I salute each of them individually." End quote. I love this slide in it that shows 4 of the 5 aircraft of one of the echelons. Don't miss the one diving over the lip of the hill, looking for enough airspeed to move up to a good altitude to avoid small arms fire. Note the closeness of the aircraft. One should miss his spot or worse, linger. Next guy is in trouble, trying to effect a wave off and return to the zone. He's at max weight with little power to call on, stop his descent and climb up to do a 180 turn to set up for another approach. Thankfully, it rarely happened. But it did. Rarely. This is number 5 from the last frame descending, and number 3 in the lower left corner. Number 4 is still diving down a hill, building airspeed to boom up to where number 3 is. I've entitled this slide, "The Essence of the Super Gaggle." It's a terrible picture. It's not clear at all, but look for the choppers, the white arrows. You can't see the sling loads beneath each one. You can see the close separation in the ordnance smoke. Red arrows from the jets who just passed through. The first 2 Foxes are almost parallel, flying to 2 separate LZs very close together, as we've seen. For some reason, that particular day, the first echelon of 5 was cleared in prior to the smoke. Or maybe it was the second echelon and the smoke had already cleared. Anyway, these unsmoked birds were naked as jaybirds. On one such mission, I was flying in the position of the CH-46 on the far left. And an A-4 jet actually flew under my aircraft, almost hitting the sling, or me, and causing a great deal of turbulence. It's all both of us pilots could do to keep from losing the aircraft. Couple that with the boom of his engine and the sound of its guns. He scared the daylights out of me. I've never forgotten, even till this day, how much that guy scared me, even more than being shot at. When I lie, fast mover that almost hit me was so close I could read the pilot's squadron number on the back of his helmet. Here's an A4 also flying beneath one of our helos on final approach, dropping a napalm canister right in a hole in the foliage, hopefully right on target. The A4 pilots, Zoomies as we called them, were a very brave and wild bunch. They took close air support seriously and lost more than a few protecting their brother Marines in Vietnam, including me. This is a ground's eye view of 2 Foxes on final. Note the old H-34 still sitting in the background. The bird in front of it is lowering his load to the ground. Also, the one right over Corporal Mike Pike's bunker with a load of bunker timbers. He's headed to his assigned LZ. Still some evidence of smoke, small portions drifting in. Coming in the opposite wind direction near a bunker closer to the old H-34, you can see and get a feel of how close and tight the birds were getting in and out. The one about to fly over the bunker just let down his load at the exiting stage right. Grunts loved the show, mostly loved seeing their supplies being delivered. This pair of 500-pound bombs on the right are impacting about 800 yards from 881 South. The North Vietnamese Army tended to place anti-aircraft guns in tree lines where there was some concealment. Chub Biu Atua could spot them during the Super Gaggle shooting at us and the jets, then with Corporal Arata's help, destroy them as soon as they could secure a close air support flight after we left. I suppose we helped find targets for this pair of NVA killers. Even after the implementation of the Super Gaggle, I never meant to convey that the NVA all over the valley and around the hills ever quit shooting at us. This is a nasty hit by an NVA 51 caliber anti-aircraft gun. This particular image shows famous Major Dave Althoff, the Super Gaggle designer, at the controls. Remember, his squadron, HMM 262, was the most heavily impacted by the early devastation of crews and birds prior to the implementation of the Super Gaggle. This round could have cost the loss of a foot or worse, but missed everything, everyone inside. Lucky, blessed, or both. Again, a game of inches. On April 1st, 1968, things began to get personal. I was co-pilot in an aircraft in exactly this position, and it just released its load. We dumped the nose over the edge of 881 South and began gathering airspeed to join the birds ahead of us, escape enemy ground fire. Unfortunately, we got hit in a rotor blade and lost about 4 feet off at the end. We were told if you lost any piece of a blade, we were through flying and probably going to be dead. I thought the aircraft was going to twist in half as the vibration was so violent. The pilot took us down to ground level, slowly flew the 7 miles to Khe Sanh combat base runway. I held the radios and called in a mayday. We flew so low that the NVA were caught unaware as we were flying taxiing right over their heads before they could even get a good shot off. I don't think we took any hits, but I wouldn't know. The pilot was too busy controlling the aircraft, and I was too busy waiting for it to fall apart. Just for the record, this is not my helicopter. We safely landed, ran for a foxhole, and another purple fox picked us up within 10 minutes. The rescue pilot took off, got us up to about 150 feet, banked sharply. You can see our damaged bird being destroyed by rocket and artillery fire as we were gaining altitude. This is what happened when a chopper was left sitting at the combat base. As you would expect, our aircraft never got its blade replaced either. Of course, there's a good story here. This is Rich Keckler, not one of our brightest lights in our squadron. Just after his bird laid down its load in an LZ on 881 South, a round came into the cockpit right through the attitude gyro, drilled a perfect hole through his visor, and barely pricked his forehead. The round was sped by the time it got to him. He immediately fell forward, spurting blood all over, and was momentarily unconscious. The pilot flying looked over and thought Rich was finished, due to blood spraying everywhere from his forehead. The pilot then continued to accelerate, pulled full power, continued to climb to exit the hill in the area. Rich came to, then raised his head, looked over at the pilot, and asked, "Am I dead yet?" The pilot laughed and was relieved the wound could be treated with 4 stitches and a Band-Aid. He flew down to Donghofer sewing up. Note the highlight circle showing the hit of the visor. The stylized woman that I put in here, carrying actually an M16, is an NVA soldier and could have actually put a round through his helmet. That night at the pilot's meeting, he stood up, zipped down his flight suit to the waist, revealed a Superman logo he'd drawn on a T-shirt with Sharpies, and finally told his story. Next, he told our flight surgeon, "Hey, Doc, I think I need a Purple Heart." This, my friends, is the end of Part 5. We're almost to the finish line. Let's go flying. Just not today. This is me on a day off from flying. To stay sharp, we usually flew 4 days on, 1 day off. Later in 1968, we flew more consecutive days as the drawdown of military forces in Vietnam had begun. After the Tet Offensive, the Battle of Khe Sanh, destruction of many of the larger cities during Tet, and of course, America's sudden distaste for continuing the war, whole aviation squadrons and infantry battalions were being sent home. The workload not only got more demanding, but the Marines were spread thin over large areas of responsibility after the drawdowns began. With fewer troops to protect the people and themselves, plus increasing infiltration of the NVA into the South, the workload was overwhelming sometimes. North Vietnamese Communist government could see they were losing all the battles, but winning the PR battle with the American people, in fact, the world at large. Our government never meant to win the war anyway. That's a topic for another presentation. By mid-1969, American forces were taking enormous casualties, trying to actually win the war. Army of the Republic of Vietnam or the ARVN and other allies, and the U.S. casualties increased yearly until the end of the war. Most were ARVN. For instance, I'll give you a few moments to look this over. What was the payoff? The concept of the Super Gaggle was to suppress, blind, and confuse the NVA gunners for 2 to 3 minutes. It shouldn't overexpose the Marines on the hills, but let the aircraft deliver loads, pick up, and get out with minimal damage. The tactic always worked, even from the first time we tried it. This plan was credited with saving between 150 and 200 kill casualties and perhaps 6 to 10 of our aircraft and crews. In February, Marine helos flew over 5,000 sorties, 5,300 hours, delivered 3,300 tons of cargo, and hauled 14,500 people for all the hills. The service got even better in March and April. We'll never be able to thank our fixed-wing and Huey gunship squadron brothers enough for their protection and love in helping to secure the hills surrounding the Khe Sanh combat base and saving our butts. This hill, 881 South, was made famous for more than its tenacity, courage, and protection of Khe Sanh by holding the high ground. If you recall the first slide in this presentation, the patch of the 3rd Battalion 26th Marines above an American flag was no design accident. The flag ceremony was instituted by Captain Dabney in early February and continued as long as the Marines occupied the hill. The story became legend to all the Marines in I Corps and then to Marines everywhere, and finally, the world. He instituted it as an act of defiance to the North Vietnamese Army as well as a moral booster for the Marines of India and Mike companies. This tactic was successful on both counts. Every morning, 2 Marines would race from a bunker to a 15-foot radio antenna and quickly raise it. This one happened to be a new donated flag flying proudly over the hill. Once flown for a few days and still in good condition, was washed, dried, folded, and mailed to the next of kin of one of the Hill's fallen warriors. Once word got out about flying the flag, the Hill was inundated with new ones. This is a picture of Captain Dabney in the center, First Lieutenant Richard Foley on the left, and First Lieutenant Charles Schneider on the guitar. They're all sitting in the command bunker. The flag, which has just been flown on 881 South behind Dabney, as I previously mentioned, was washed, dried, and folded to be sent to next of kin. The captain recalled using many VT, or variable time fuses, or their 105mm shells. Dabney said it would burst about 20 feet above the ground and mowed NVA troops down like a John Deere does a lawn. Not only was it a good fuse, First Lieutenant Foley's father owned a factory in the Philadelphia area that made the fuses. Dabney said, "What's wrong with all of us enjoying the profits?" End quote. Pardon the pun, but this flag is shot. Soon all of the flags flown by India Company were eventually in tatters. When word got back to the real world, many flags from home began arriving at 881 South. A number of flagpoles were also sent by loved ones, veterans groups, and complete strangers. The Hill was even sent a coffin flag from a widow of a World War II, killed in action Marine. She'd been given it when he was buried and sent a note to Captain Dabney saying he'd have wanted the flag to be used and be useful again, instead of gathering dust on a closet shelf. The first such flag ceremony took place on February 17, 1968. These two men, Lance Corporal Marvin Brown and Lance Corporal Barney Ulrich, were the first. I'm quoting Navy Chaplain Reverend Ray Stube from his book Valley of Decision, co-authored by John Pridos, who spent over 100 days on 881 South. And I quote, "Early during the siege, the Marines began to raise an American flag over their position every morning and night. Gesture might have been patterned after the Battle of Iwo Jima, at which it had also been the 26th Marines who raised the American flag atop Mount Suribuchi. In any case, on top of 881 South, this flag-raising ceremony occurred twice a day, at first using a small flag that belonged to one of his, Captain Dabney's men, and a small radio aerial. The raising of the colors followed the prescribed ceremonial procedures. The exact time of day was varied to fool the NVA." End quote. This picture says it all. The flags drove the North Vietnamese army crazy. They wore out their mortar tubes, trying to get a direct hit on one. Once word of this picture reached the Stars and Stripes military newspaper, the deluge began of flags and poles sent to 881 South. It seemed to energize the home front. One day, Dabney found one of his platoon leaders, Second Lieutenant Owen Matthews, crouched in a foxhole sobbing. The young lieutenant had arrived only 3 days before, and already 29 of his 33 men in his platoon had become casualties. While commiserating, Dabney discovered that the man could play the bugle, a skill for which he had long been searching. In the morning, Second Lieutenant Matthews would play to the colors in the evening retreat. 2 Marines would run with the flag and raise it, while everyone else stood in their positions and saluted or presented arms. Marines rotated the flag details so that every man could have a chance to participate, all except for Lieutenant Matthews. He blew his horn twice, every day. The timing was a fine piece of calculation. The NVA replied to the flag ceremonies with mortar fire, and the Marines could hear the shells inserted in the tubes an instant before firing. India Company carried out its ceremony and bugle call so that precisely 29 seconds had elapsed, after which every man dove for cover. North Vietnamese shells took 31 seconds to arrive on target. By the way, this image was also taken by Catherine Leroy. If you look closely, you'll see 4 purple foxes at 881. 2 have already delivered their supplies, the red arrows, and are departing. Another 2 of the yellow are on final approach. Pilots were all aware of the presence of the flag, and we often watch the wind's effect on the flag to get lined up properly in our approaches. As word traveled about the flag flying, a high-ranking Marine officer visiting down at the Khe Sanh base told Captain Dabney that he shouldn't fly the Stars and Stripes unless he flew the South Vietnamese colors too. The captain advised the senior officer he would be glad to fly the flag of South Vietnam if someone would provide a detail of ARVN troops to raise and lower it each day under fire. That was the last time the subject was mentioned. Believe it or not, virtue signaling in 1968. This is yet another image of one of my squadron's birds on final resupply at Hill 81 South. You can see how the smoke is almost all dispersed. So this is one of the last aircraft near the end of the gaggle. Note the flag standing almost straight out in the heavy wind at the summit. We use the flag as a weather vane to compensate for drift in our approaches and not be blown off course. Always lots of swirling turbulent winds on the hills at 3,000 feet. Several of the men rode home for state or city flags. This Marine flies his Florida state flag right next to his bunker while reading a letter from home. 881 South was densely forested when the Marines took possession. After constant shelling by the North Vietnamese army, there were only large stumps and dead trees left, which became hazards to running men looking for cover and landing helicopters. Men tried cutting them down, but the stumps were filled with shrapnel, which ruined saws and axes. The men finally resorted to blowing them up with C4 explosives. Remember Doc David Steinberg? You're going to love this story. Sometimes I think only Marines can screw up a free picnic. Anyway, in February 1968, Steinberg, who was from Chicago, as were a few other of the men, wrote Mayor Richard Daley requesting a City of Chicago flag to be flown atop of 881 South. The mayor accommodated his wishes. Steinberg folded the flag and took it with him when he departed the hill on April 18th. This photo shows the flag being displayed outside his new, quieter home in Quang Tri. He cared for and displayed the flag the balance of his tour and took it home when he rotated. In August 1989, he wrote Mayor Daley's son, now mayor himself, stating he would like to return the flag to the city of Chicago. The newly appointed Chicago Veteran Liaison proudly hung the flag at City Hall until the Khe Sanh Veterans Incorporated held a Tet Plus 24 mini reunion in Chicago. That would have been in 1992. At that time, Doc Steinberg's flag was presented to the Khe Sanh Veterans President, Earl Breeding, without any mention of the Doc. Steinberg recently says the flag is still in the custody of the Khe Sanh vets. The last time he saw it was at another reunion in Philadelphia. It was then hanging on the wall with a sign referring to it as a Viet Cong flag, Steinberg said. Is it possible that the vets of Khe Sanh never saw a Viet Cong flag? Many of the men got their own small flag sent from home and kept it near their bunny hole or bunker. Here a sad ritual is taking place as a killed in action Marine is carried in a body bag to be picked up when the next chopper lands. This ritual happened too often on the hills. This young Marine is carrying his small personal flag down 881 South. Battle was over. Regardless of his time there, I'm sure he was ready to come down. His flag got him through. What I remember seeing as we had approached the hill was a large American flag flowing at least 15 to 20 feet high on a metal pole. Rarely did we see more than one or two grunts, members of the HST team, until we were finished. Loads usually spent the day in the zones, and the men waited for darkness to scramble out of their bunkers, to pull apart the nets and secure their treasure. This is why I will always stand for it, salute or cover my heart, and let tears well up in my eyes. My father was witness to the famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi, just 5 days before being wounded and leaving the island for a hospital ship and a trip home. I've entitled this slide Dusk Near the South China Sea at Home. One of the echelons of 5 breaking left to land at home in Fubai after a long day at Hill 881. After implementation of the Super Gaggle, we lost some birds, but no crewmen or aviators during the rest of this mission. Soon after landing, debriefing, a shower, and a drink at the club, we went to bed. Now it was time for the next group of men at HMM 364. And in this story, whose work had just begun. The rest of the men who worked all night to get these birds ready for tomorrow's mission. I'm sure I don't want to leave anyone out of the story of not only my still being here today, but also give them all the credit for it. I mean the enlisted personnel that kept our birds flying. You can barely see a hole in the roof of our only hangar. This and the ground in front of it are where all the work was done to keep the HMM's 364's Foxes flying. For these many men, we owe our lives. And it's time CH-46 was one of the most complex, sophisticated aircraft flying in Vietnam. All helicopters were complicated, but this was more so. If you look at how a helo is designed to fly, it's impossible. These young men learned more than enough to keep us pilots in the air, with many of them having to accompany us on missions as gunners and crew chiefs, in the very aircraft they prepared for flight. This is a picture from the inside of the hangar of a rocket hit and its shrapnel spray hitting our maintenance hangar. Easy to see how the daylight showing through the shrapnel holes that could have been devastating to troops. Thankfully, this round hit the hangar when not a person was in the building. Thank God it was a humid, hot night and the maintenance crews were working on the birds outside under the arc lights. Again, forgive the horrible picture. This is a picture of a trooper showing the relative size of the rocket impact. Men love to send pictures home showing their girlfriends, not their mothers, how much danger they were in. This bird took over 200 hits from the rocket that came through the roof. Fortunately for us, it was one of our Hangar Queens. Hangar Queen is an aircraft that has so many things wrong with it, with a crap shot out of it. It's not prudent to spend or waste new good parts to fix it. There were a few birds that got shot up just sitting in the parking spaces at night. Some got fixed, some got to be queens. Also, a Hangar Queen is usually cannibalized for its parts to keep the other aircraft flying. It's a good source of spare parts we might have to wait weeks for from Japan, our closest supplier, to get. When you can use one airframe that is too far gone to keep many others flying, I compared it to an organ donor. Stupid, huh? But it did allow us to fly more missions. Believe me, the maintenance people and the crew chiefs loved the Hangar Queens. That kept us living and them flying. Looks like not everybody's on board with the program today. This was a favorite gesture in war since I can remember. Anytime your buddy picked up his camera to take a picture, this is what he got. Photo bomb. I can't blame him. He's asking himself, where's my girlfriend right now? Where's my mail? How short am I? That's the days left in the country. These guys had lots of spunk, only controlled by senior enlisted. And the senior enlisted did a marvelous job, too. We were so respected by enlisted, I wanted to adopt some of these guys to take home. I never heard the word sir uttered so often. I used to look around to see who the young man was talking to. When I arrived in country, the monsoon weather was not over yet. It rained and stormed most days, and when one of the birds got stuck, we pulled, you can see the tractor on the left, and pushed. The mud was thick and sticky like red cement. I'll never forget the time one of the men yelled, "Hey, just pretend you're in Hollywood and you're pushing a stacked blonde in her Cadillac convertible." These men were amazing. I think I mentioned earlier the amount of days we aviators flew. These men rarely got time off, especially the crew chiefs, gunners, and maintenance men. They didn't want time off. Crew chiefs had their own aircraft and worked around the clock with maintenance to keep their bird up. It was not only a source of pride how many days their bird stayed up, but no one better ever not finish work on an aircraft because of wanting to go to bed for the enlisted club. Once a man qualified to become a crew chief, he adopted one that he would be responsible for until one of them died. We aviators studied the manual of the CH-46D endlessly. It could never stump a crew chief on any detail he didn't know about the bird. I can't shower enough praise on these men. They kept us flying safely. The rest was up to us. In this case, this is just boys being boys. Office staff, cook, truck drivers, perimeter grunts, air traffic controllers, maintenance crew, crew chiefs, and gunners alike. Everyone was off duty at that time, having a friendly football game. Sturdy young men. Look in the background and you'll see a grass field to play on. Not for my boys, because when there's mud, boys will be boys, just letting off steam. Soon enough, they will be back to work and or in the air, saving all of our lives. This is one of our finest, pre-flighting the aircraft before his pilot for the mission and co-pilot follows him around looking at the same thing. It's a Navy, Marine, Coast Guard safety ritual. Instead of two eyes looking at something, it's usually four or more. He's real excited today as he is a brand new crew chief with a brand new aircraft right off the boat. By the way, the tagline under the fox on the tail says, "The Return of the Fox." This is because the Foxes went home in 1965, only to return in 1967 to Vietnam as a brand new squadron. This is Second Lieutenant William Resor Ammon. You can see his dates on there. He was killed on 881 South, one day prior to all Marines being relieved from 881. Couldn't wait to get off the hill so he could replace his bamboo pipe with a corn cob. On April 17, 1968, he flew all the Marines left on Hill 881 South to Dong Ha. Defense of the hill and the Siege of Khe Sanh was over. One of the troops due to leave Vietnam within days said to one of our crew chiefs it was the best chopper ride he'd had in his 13-month tour, except for possibly the one he anticipated on the Freedom Bird going home. Not many of the men that day were on the hill from the first day of the initial attack, December 20th, 1967. Of the original 400 on 881 South, only 19 were not killed or wounded. I guess that's a 95% casualty rate. None of these losses were part of a single-pitched battle, but in separate incidents throughout the siege. As Captain Dabney said, and I quote, "Incoming was constant. Although we learned to cope with it, to a point, a lucky round in a trench or active medevac zone was just as deadly in April as it was in January." End quote. 7 helicopters were shot down with some crew lost and wounded, and I can honestly say we always came when medevacs were called, weather permitting. This is a footnote about Dave Powell, a combat photographer that I told you about at the beginning of the presentation. He spent a number of days at both Khe Sanh and the Hill 881 South. I've included 53 of his shots in this presentation. Without his images, the story of 881 and the Super Gaggle could not have been adequately told. The story is written by Bill Sneed, senior editor, Lawrence, Kansas Journal World, May 26, 2002. Mr. Sneed ran a UPI studio, photo bureau, from 67 to 69 in Saigon, Vietnam. He met Dave there in 1968. I quote, "Dave Powell is a security guard protecting Bob Hope's 9-hole golf course in Toluca Lake, California, when he read 1967 Time magazine that convinced him he could be a war correspondent." I quote Dave, "I didn't have the money or the good camera or a typewriter, but I really wanted to go see a war," Powell recalled. A month later, armed with no special skills or experience, Powell, 25, landed in Vietnam carrying a hand-me-down that he thought was a Voigtlander. It was actually a Minolta camera at $50 cash. He also carried letters from 2 small California newspapers promising to print his stories and photos. It was August 5th, 1967. The Tet Offensive, the turning point in the war, was 6 months away. Powell blew half his bankroll on a room in the legendary Intercontinental Hotel in Saigon. I quote, "I remember standing on my hotel room balcony seeing a string of flares pop on the horizon, drifting slowly down, and then the distant sound of rolling thunder, explosions." Powell said wistfully, "I remember thinking, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me." The letters from the newspapers got him accredited as a journalist. Press cards from the South Vietnamese government and U.S. MACV. It was Powell's ticket to see what war was all about. With his press cards and almost no money, he picked a flight bound for Con Thien and hooked up with the 8th and 9th Marine Regiments. Picked up fatigues, a helmet, flak jacket, and an M16. The food was free and he had a place to sleep. For 3 months, he split his time among the Marines and a couple of Army Air Cav units. The line he heard most from the troop is what every correspondent in Vietnam heard. "You mean you don't have to be here?" He said, "I went to operations, took some awful pictures, and everybody was happy to have me walk along with them." End quote. Powell learned there was way more to survival than defending yourself. "It's unbelievable how and more everything is to chance," he said. "I took pictures of a helicopter blowing up in midair. My helicopter. The one I was supposed to be riding in," he said sadly. Here's a picture of Dave in his steel pot on 881 South. The Hill Marines named him Hollywood 6. The tagline on his helmet is, "War photos, anyone?" And I quote, "When things get chaotic, the noise, things happen so fast, making decisions on the spot, it just makes you part of a roll of the dice, fate." He recalls walking out of a rice paddy with a unit of the 5th Air Cav. Path forked. A minute later, he heard an explosion that turned to see 2 wounded GIs on the booby trap trail that he had not chosen. 3 months after he arrived in Vietnam, Powell was still broke. Lots of cans of snapshots in his film cans had developed an infection in his neck the size of a hand grenade. In Can Tho, Powell got his neck drained, hitched his way back to the Saigon docks, and after knocking on many doors, got a job as a seaman. On one of his voyages to Taiwan, he put his seaman's wages to use. He bought 2 cameras, a Miranda and a Minolta. He practiced with them aboard ship, and his film developed along the way so he could check his progress. During a stopover in Hong Kong, he got 2 more letters of accreditation from Chinese newspapers. February 1968, he quit his seaman's job when the ship docked at Saigon. So, why did Dave want to return to Vietnam in the war? For one thing, he learned how to use his cameras. And the war in Vietnam was getting hotter. American casualties were at their highest. Powell walked into the United Press International photo office, a block from the Saigon docks, looking for work. Photo staffer Charlie Eggleston vouched for him, having met him in the field, but said that he hadn't seen any of his pictures. Eggleston was killed on assignment, by the way, barely 3 months later. I quote Eggleston, "I was running UPI's photo bureau and was put off by his choice of cameras. Cheap cameras are not dependable when treated poorly. He wore them like a tourist, too, straps across his chest like bandoliers. I didn't realize when he had no place to call home or so. Out of necessity, he played everything close to the vest. He was quiet and sullen. My attitude toward him changed when he volunteered to go to Khe Sanh at 881 South, one of the nastiest places in Vietnam. I signed him up on as a freelancer, meaning UPI would get first pick of his pictures. We agreed to pay him $25 plus free film for each of his combat photos that we transmitted out of Saigon. He spent the night at Eggleston's apartment and was gone the next day. Eggleston again. There weren't many photographers at Khe Sanh, and none that I knew of on 881 South. I quote Powell now. I remember running into Robert Ellison, a young 23-year-old quiet guy working for Newsweek, Powell said. He was so excited about getting a set of pictures of an ammo dump exploding. End quote. One of these photos made the cover of Newsweek. Also, by the way, Ellison was killed a few days later on what was meant to be a quick round trip to Saigon. C-123 and 48th Marine were flying in, blown from the sky near Khe Sanh. On March 22nd, more than 1,100 rounds of mortar, rockets, and artillery hit Khe Sanh at the rate of 100 explosions an hour. I quote Eggleston now. Powell was there, shooting pictures with his Minolta and Miranda. Almost every still photographer in Vietnam used Nikons or Leicas. 2 professional brands, but relatively cheap to buy in the Orient. Powell, who I'd taken to calling the Miranda Man, proved that being with the camera and in action is far more than owning the world's best camera. Day 1, when his undeveloped film began arriving in our Saigon bureau, we were impressed. Our competitors were doing badly. Powell was making UPI a giant. We were leading the play. New York Times, Washington Post, the world. I was asked by many of my times by my staffers in messages from UPI New York and Saigon. Who is this guy? Where'd you find him? Years later, Dave Powell said, I visited many Army and Marine units during my stay in Vietnam. The one thing that impressed me most about 881 South was they were in the worst possible situation with the least amount of equipment and support of any other site I visited. If the first CAD had been holding Hill 81 South, it would have lifted a freaking Walmart out of the hill. Many times I would get caught up in my photo taking and do some stupid things on 881. I would look over my shoulder to see at least one Marine watching out for me. It's just that I've never felt the same sense of trust and loyalty amongst men that I had experienced with the Marines of 881 South. They let me join them for 4 days. and generously shared the scarce amount of food and water with me. Shaped my life forever after. Most of all, I learned what you can only learn in war, the meaning of the word brotherhood. This is a letter sent to Dave Powell, July 10th, 2006, from the National Museum of the Marine Corps. I'll read it to you because it's not a very good copy. Dear Mr. Powell, on behalf of the National Museum of the Marine Corps, I want to extend our appreciation and thanks for your recent donation of the Miranda 35mm camera used to photograph the Marine operations at Khe Sanh, Hill 881 South, and Con Thien. The camera truly enhances our collection as a welcome addition to the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Beyond display at the Vietnam Gallery, the museum opens in November later this year. Your nation has been assigned a session number 2006-5. In order to complete our records on your gift, it would be appreciated if you would return one signed copy of the enclosed deed of gift form in the mailing envelope provided. The other copy is yours for your records. Your interest in the Marine Corps and its history is displayed by the generosity of this gift. It's deeply appreciated. Sincerely, Jennifer Castro, Collections Manager. This image is of Hollywood 6's camera. Powell said, and I quote, "It never occurred to me that the National Museum of the Marine Corps might want my camera. When they asked for it to be displayed, I was shocked. As a matter of fact, this whole museum thing is mind-boggling. I love my old Minolta. We went through quite a bit together, but I can still go and visit it whenever I want. I'm honored to have the camera included in the Vietnam exhibit. David L. Hollywood 6 Powell." In fear of committing death by PowerPoint, I should probably read this to you, which is not really done when you have a presentation in PowerPoint. So I will. Results of Khe Sanh and Tet. Combined services of the Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines involved not only the Battle of Khe Sanh, but all the battles of the Tet Offensive. Completely decimated the attacking NVA and Viet Cong. The NVA retreated from Khe Sanh, suffering approximately 20,000 killed in action, plus 1,000 more wounded, missing, and deserted. Communists suffered a huge military and political defeat during these battles. The 84,000 to 100,000 attackers during the Tet Offensive. 45 to 63,000 were killed in action. In total, for the year 1968, the enemy lost 181,000 plus troops, including political cadres, propaganda, re-education officers, etc. Many of their most important irreplaceable infrastructure perished. Viet Cong were virtually destroyed. They never recovered to be an effective fighting force for the rest of the war. However, the Vietnamese civilian population suffered terrible losses and dislocation inflicted by the Communist North. Countrywide, over 9,000 were killed, approximately 18,500 wounded, and 115,000 were left homeless. The base and hills at Khe Sanh were relieved by the Army 1st Air Cav on 8 April 1968 during Operation Pegasus, and finally abandoned by the Marines, Army, and partners for the last time on 9 October 1968. Likewise, because of the very importance of these awards, I will read the major decorations awarded to the men of 881 South. 1 Congressional Medal of Honor winner, Carl Gorman Taylor, Senior, Staff Sergeant. Navy Cross Medals, of which there were 4. Second Lieutenant Thomas Brindley, Captain Charles Bryan, Second Lieutenant Michael Thomas, Captain William Dabney. Silver Star Medals, 8 awarded. Bronze Star Medal, 25 awarded. The Purple Heart Medal, almost 400, only counting troops originally assigned to 881 South, not counting all others ending up on the hill for any reason. Probably nearer 800 would be a right count. These 3 pictures show Robert in 2006, Corporal Arata on a rear break-in, the action at 881 South, and Bob teaching a lieutenant colonel near Yuma, Arizona. So what happened to the mightiest corporal in the world? Bob left the Marine Corps as a staff sergeant and settled in San Diego, California. However, his service to his country in the Marines was not over. By a couple of friends casually talking, he was invited to pass on the lessons he learned on 881 South to future USN Marine Corps Forward Air Controllers, FACS. He did so at Marine Aviation and Weapons Tactics Squadron 1 at Marine Corps Air Station, or MCAS, Yuma. Arizona. From 2006 to 2009, Bob spoke to future fact classes. Major Tom Campbell was a student in one of the classes and talked about Aroda's presentation. I quote, "It was simply fantastic. It was exactly what the students, me, needed to see how much had not changed. The requirements of knowing your equipment and proceedings and procedures, knowing your commander and his requirements and his procedures. This was a substantial and important contribution to the course. It's also extremely humbling. He and the other Marines not only endured 881 South, they excelled there." Robert J. Aroda died unexpectedly from cancer in November 2009 at the age of 64. Here he is being laid to rest, buried at Arlington National Cemetery on November 15, 2009, with full military honors. He will long be remembered as the world's mightiest corporal, as those are the words of the epitaph written on his headstone. The course, the building, fact ready room facilities at MCAS Yuma are in the name of Corporal Robert J. Aroda, who is a powerful witness to all the current Marines that took his instruction. This image is of a docent at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, in front of a diorama-like display showing the 881 South Command Bunker, the radio tower, and the ever-present American flag. It also shows a Navy corpsman treating a wounded Marine. Finally, on the far right of the slide is a 106 millimeter recoilless rifle, poised to shoot over the stack of sandbags. This is one of 3 murals in the museum devoted to 881 South, titled India 6 and the Super Gaggle. It shows Captain Dabney, India 6, and to his left, Corporal Bob Aroda controlling the whole operation. The murals were painted by artist Paul Barker, and smaller reproductions can be ordered online. You might recall my use of this mural in the presentation. Also, this is another part of the honor paid to 881 South at the museum. It's a depiction of Hill 881 South and HMM 364 during the siege in 1968. On the left, it shows Marines hurrying a wounded man to the aft ramp for medevac. And on the right, it shows a Marine mortarman with a white arrow holding his ears from the sound of the helicopter. His mortar tube is to our right, the yellow arrow. I never believed I flew this aircraft, but did fly both 153985 and 153987. I'm sure this is the serial number of the first one lost by the squadron with only one survivor during the Battle of Hue City on 5 February 1968. Its serial number would have been 153986, call sign Yankee Kilo 13 or YK13. I was one of 2 of the replacement aviators for this crew that was killed. I arrived in Vietnam 2 days after it crashed. William Howard Dabney was born in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. He was raised in Panama, Gloucester County, Virginia. He attended Yale University in 1953 to 1954, then enlisted in the Marine Corps. He was discharged with the rank of sergeant and reenlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve in 1957. Realizing that to be a Marine officer to command men needed a college degree, he attended Virginia Military Institute, or VMI, graduating in 1961 and commissioned in the Marine Corps. That year, he married Virginia Puller, daughter of the legendary Marine Corps Lieutenant General Louis Chesty Puller. Dabney served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam during the war. For his meritorious heroics on Hill 881 South, he was awarded the Navy Cross. This award is the Navy, Marine, Coast Guard Medal, second only to the Congressional Medal of Honor. During his tours, he was also awarded the Silver Star Medal, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart Medal, and 11 other lesser awards. Dabney retired from the Marine Corps in 1990 and died February 15, 2012, at age 77, at his home in Lexington, Virginia. There's an old saying among Marines, as long as a Marine is remembered, he's not dead. I'm sure Captain, later Colonel, Bill Dabney will always be remembered. These are the Dabneys in retirement. Virginia Puller Dabney passed away June 29, 2018, at the age of 78. She was born in Shanghai, China, May 27, 1940. The daughter of the late Chesty Puller, the most decorated of Marine officers. Growing up the daughter of a career Marine, she lived in China, Hawaii, San Diego, New Orleans, and Camp Lejeune, but always came back to her beloved Virginia. To the dismay of her mother, she went north to Smith College, which was not in keeping with her mother's plan for her to meet a good Southern boy. Yet as fate would have it, her mother was at a party and met Virginia's future husband, Bill Dabney, VMI 60, who was in order of importance a Marine, Southern, and tall. They would have 3 children. She was a Marine all her life and attended many gatherings of Khe Sanh veterans and, of course, the Warriors of Hill 881 South reunions. As for all of you that have put up with my crude and sometimes amateur attempts to inform you of this great story, I thank you and hope you will remember these Marines for their courage and their other friends for being always faithful to the mission and each other. Please wait for some acknowledgement slides to come. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge some people and thank many of those who aided in the creation compilation of this presentation that made it possible. I'm sure I'm not including everyone. But first of all, Lieutenant Colonel John A. Al Chauncey, USMC retired, chronicle and storyteller of HMM 364 and publisher of many stories and parables for our magnificent squadron and its relationship to the men of 881 South. Al's partner in crime, Bruce M. Geiger, former First Lieutenant, USMC. Second, David Douglas Duncan, and all the eminent photojournalists who covered the battle and defense of 881 South and the Battle of Khe Sanh. There are many photojournalists mentioned in this story. Third, my executive producer, Mr. Ryan Kussner, genius videographer who amalgamated words and slides into a powerful video. He exceeded all my expectations with this final product. Ryan also agrees that this story has to be told. Fourth and last, the prescient, unequivocal words of then Captain, now Colonel William Bill Dabney, USMC deceased. Exemplified the courage and resolve of a U.S. Marine officer to defeat an enemy under the most horrific of circumstances. He gave his men hope, victory, pride in themselves, and to be always faithful to each other and the mission. Before leaving Southern California 2 years ago, following grandchildren to the great state of Texas, I was affiliated with this finest group of veterans representing all of our military branches of service. I'm also representing the 58,563 men and women who gave their lives on behalf of the people of South Vietnam. Don't forget, most served because their country called them. They answered the call. More enlisted than being drafted. This does not include the over 300,000 more wounded in action, both mentally and physically, with many of them still suffering as victims of that time. As you can see on the banner, our mission at the Freedom Committee of Orange County is to pass the torch of liberty on to future generations through our own living history. After 50 years of feeling the rejection of our return from that war, I joined the Freedom Committee because of their mission. The founder of the Freedom Committee thought it important for our junior high, high school, and college students to hear from people who have actually lived these veterans' stories of service. Who doesn't like first-person reporting on heroism in defense of freedom? To fulfill this mission is to get as many men and women, veterans, trained to go into school classrooms with our own personal messages from World War II, the current global wars on terror. Sadly, we're losing most of our World War II speakers. God knows there's no room currently in the students' curriculum to hear about any of these great patriotic endeavors. So I credit this group of veterans for training me and inspiring me to tell stories of heroism, sacrifice to as many of us as we can that have never heard them. The only thing I miss not living in California are my school visits and their insightful students they shared with me. After my tour in Vietnam was over, I was returned home in March in 1969. I was stationed back in Pensacola, Florida, as an advanced instrument instructor. This slide was taken in 1970, just before my honorable discharge from the Marines after 5 years of service. That day, we aviators got to take our significant others in what was billed as a taxi run down the long runway at NAS Pensacola. It was really a little more than that. My wife, Patricia, was in the front seat, me in the back. The smoke, noise, radios, and takeoff scared the daylights out of her. Actually, All of us guys went full throttle, roared down the long runway, rotated, flew to 20 to 50 feet, then cut power and eased back to the runway. Without any events, we taxied back to the parking spot. Patricia has loved it to this day. We were high school sweethearts, and it's 2023. Most times we've been happily married. Ha ha. Is anyone always happily married? We have 3 adult kids, 7 grandkids, and as of March 2023, been married for 59 years. Just hang in there, folks. Things will always be better after a good night's sleep.